This session is going to be going over the human developmental theories, Erickson, Piaget, and Kohlberg, and the differences between each of them. And I always say it, do not come in this session trying to memorize anything. The goal is never to memorize anything. Why? Because you're not a computer. You're not just going to be able to regurgitate it inside of the exam. The goal of this session is to be able to recognize and apply the concepts as they are related to questions as you see them on the exam. Because a lot of times people try to memorize everything, to try to get all the ages in order and all these different things. But when they're going inside of a question, they almost like freeze up because they're not able to apply it. So the goal of the session is to be able to recognize and apply it, not memorize. Because if you find yourself memorizing, you may be beating up on yourself, not understanding all the nick and cranny things that you can ideally see within inside of the situation, but the goal is to be able to recognize it. If you see a question that's talking about Piaget, are you able to identify the different stages and what could be within those stages? And that is the goal, being able to recognize and apply it. So starting off, Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. So it's getting into how we are going to see somebody ideally propel through their cognition and how it develops. And a mnemonic, even before we hop into it, because a lot of times people get tripped up or they are like, man, I'm not really sure what order the stages are in, or man, what are the stages? There are two that I would recommend. So that way you can have in your back pocket. So if your back is against the wall during the exam, you're not feeling like, oh my God, super duper overwhelmed. So the first one is stupid Piaget creates fuss. So each letter of this mnemonic is going to tell you the stage in order based on what you could particularly see. So the first one up to bat, stupid, the S is sensory motor. P in Piaget is pre-operational. The C in create is going to be concrete operational. And then the F in fuss is formal operational. Each one is going to tell you which stage that you are looking at. So the S in stupid is sensory motor. P in Piaget is pre-operational. C in concrete is concrete operational. And the F in fuss is formal operational. The second one, if that one doesn't really resonate with you, is some people can fly, because when they put their mind to it, they're able to soar to the heights that they weren't previously. So the S in some is going to be sensory motor. The P in people, pre-operational. The C in can is concrete operational. The F in fly is formal operational. Why? Because those are going to be the order of the stages: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So those are two mnemonics, if you're like, man, I'm not really sure what the stages are, that you can utilize inside of the exam. Because the best thing that you can do for yourself is to make the information make sense, not just have the information just floating around in your mind. So again, stupid Piaget creates fuss, or some people can fly. S, sensory motor. P, pre-operational. C, concrete operational. And F is formal operational. So the first stage up to bat is sensory motor. And an easy way to be able to recognize and apply sensory motor is by breaking it apart. So the first part is sensory. So if you think about sensory, think of the senses, because when people are in the sensory motor stage, they are going to utilize their senses to gain experience of their environment. But in addition to that, the motor part, think of motor activity, because sensory motor is where somebody is going to utilize their senses as well as their motor activity to gain experience and understand what their environment is. So the age range here is 0 to 2 years old. So if you picture a child from 0 to 2 years old, once they're able to get locomotive, they're going to be ripping around. So a 2-year-old is going to be running around all over the place, and a child from 0 to 2 is going to be putting everything in their mouth. Why? Because sensory motor is where a child is going to get experience and understand what their environment is by utilizing their senses in motor activity. So that is why a young child, you're always like, don't put that in your mouth. That's caca. That's bad moves, bad vibes. But a child doesn't understand that. So they're going to have to experience something in order to know whether it is something that is dangerous or not. So sensory motor is where a child is going to utilize their senses and their motor activity to understand their environment. The age range here again is 0 to 2 years old. So stated in a different way, sensory motor looks at how thought processes function without the use of symbols. Why? Because a young child is not going to have symbols in their mind and understand things that are not actually in front of them because they don't have that cognition at this given moment. But in addition to that, motor activity without the use of symbols as well. So all things are learned based on experience. So a child in this stage is going to get up on top of the dresser and slap the ground to know that getting on a dresser and trying to fly like Superman is not going to work. They do not have that ability to look at it and say, you know what, that dresser's kind of high up. You know what, ground's kind of hard. So boom, they are going to learn the experience by doing versus thinking it all the way through. So that's why sensory motor is where they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to understand where they are particularly at. The main goal of the sensory motor stage is object permanence. And an easy way to be able to recognize and apply object permanence is object, which is something that's solid. And if we look closely, we can identify the word permanent because object permanence is where a child or individual is able to understand that if an object is not directly in front of them, that it still exists. And an example of what object permanence is, a child without object permanence is going to play peekaboo. You're going to put your hands over your face and the child's going to be like, man, where do they go? It's almost like they're a magician. But then you're like, boom, oh my God, they're surprised every single time. Or you're like, you know what? I'm going to put this ball under the blanket, put the blanket over the ball. The child's running around. Well, like, whoa, where'd my ball go? And they're almost having a breakdown. But once they obtain object permanence, it's knowing that something is there, even when it is out of sight, out of mind. And object permanence can develop in addition to that separation anxiety. So if a child is separated from their parent, if they have object permanence, they may know that their parent is coming back. If they lack object permanence, they may feel like their parent is gone forever. In that scenario, they would have to have a healthy attachment, because if you know your attachment styles, healthy attachment, child's going to learn and say, oh my God, my parent is gone. If they have a maladaptive attachment style, they may not even give a crap that their parent is no longer there. So additional examples of object permanence: separation from their parent or caregiver, putting a ball under a blanket, you hiding something from the child of like, you know what, I'm tired of you playing with this. You put the toy somewhere and then they're acting like the toy is no longer there. Object permanence is if an object is not in front of them, they're not going to think it is permanent. They get object permanence. So like, you know what, I know you're hiding this from me and I'm going to get it. So the key components within sensory motor is the body movement and their use of their senses. Again, sensory, think of senses; motor, think of motor activity, because the child will utilize their senses and experiences to learn their environment and navigate it accordingly. So in a child in this situation would touch a candle flame and get burnt to know, don't touch the candle flame, don't touch the stove. And if you've been around a child from 0 to 2 years old, you can't really tell them anything. You're like, hey, stay away from that. And then they hit the wall and you're like, well, we knew you were going to hit the wall. So probably not a good idea for you to run at the wall full speed. Or don't touch the stove, it's hot. Burns its hand and it's like, oh my goodness, we told you this. But sensory motor, they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to navigate their environment. So a couple of scenarios to remember the stage or articulate it a little bit further. Imagine yourself walking around a room and a baby is in their crib playing with their feet and looking around at different objects in the room. In this same room, picture a child running around making motor sounds with their toy car. So in this example, the young child playing with its feet symbolizes the use of senses. Additionally, it's looking around the room at different objects. The child is utilizing their eyesight as well as the touch to understand what the environment is at this given moment. In addition to that, the young child running around making motor sounds symbolizes the motor part of the name, sensory motor. Child is utilizing their senses and motor activity to understand their environment. The second scenario is a little bit more of an adult version, but if you've been in this situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So imagine yourself driving around in your car and you hear a sound coming from the motor. You use your senses, aka turn the radio all the way down, and then say, I'm a mechanic for a millisecond to understand what's going on with the motor. So in the car, you're hearing a sound, you turn the radio all the way down, like you're going to analyze the car like you're a mechanic. So in this example, the sound coming from the motor is to recall or recognize and apply the motor part of the name And the use of your senses, aka hearing what the heck is going on, is how you're going to remember the sensory part of the name. Sensory motor. You're utilizing their senses as well as motor activity to understand what's going on in your environment. And the key component here is object permanence. If an object is not directly in front of them prior to object permanence, they think it's all the way gone. Once they get object permanence, once the object is gone, they know that it is permanent, even though it's not directly in front of them. The next stage is pre-operational. So key emphasis on pre, think of prior, and then operational is where they're going to be collaborating with other individuals. So pre-operational is prior to the individual being operational or collaborative with other individuals. The age range here is 2 to 7 years old. So sensory motor, again, they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to understand their environment, while pre-operational, they're going to act like they know everything that's going on in the environment, and they're not willing to operate or collaborate with other individuals. So during this stage, young children think about things symbolically. So we're introducing the use of symbols, because sensory motor, it was them not being able to connect things directly together. What this looks like is that this is the ability to make one thing, such as a word, object, experience, or time, stand for something other than the object that is directly in front of us. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A child hears the music for an ice cream truck and associates it with getting ice cream, regardless of what is actually going on. So key emphasis here is regardless of what's going on. So if you have an ice cream truck theme song that is playing in the car or in a grocery store or wherever you're at, the child may say, you know what? I heard the song before. I got ice cream the last time. I'm getting ice cream right now. I want ice cream. They're able to associate things that are not directly associated at this given moment. Another example, someone hears the word ASWB or exam, and they instantly become anxious about having to take the exam. They're like, you know what? Poof. I see those 4 letters, ASWB. I'm like, I'm out. Or hear about the exam. And if you fail the exam, you're like, man, I don't ever want to hear that word ever again. Or once you pass the exam, you're like, do not ever bring up the exam ever again. But people are able to start symbolizing or associating things that were not otherwise associated directly together. Another example, I hear the sound of water boiling and I think of spending time with my father drinking coffee. So if I hear water boiling, I don't even have to be around my father. I don't even have to be getting coffee, but I start thinking that boiling water means that I'm getting coffee or that I'm going to be spending time with my father. So I start associating multiple things together, even though they were not directly associated prior to this given moment, almost like conditioning. But where it becomes pre-operational, where prior we're able to operate with other individuals, is that their thinking is still egocentric or being about themselves without the consideration for other individuals. So they have difficulty taking the perspectives of others and will often have problems when things do not go their way. So breaking this down a little bit further, egocentric, key emphasis on ego, think of somebody being all about themselves, and then centric, think about center. They think that they are the center of attention and that everybody should listen to them and adhere to their needs at this given moment, or being about themselves without the consideration, as well as they're not even considering anybody else. They're like, it's all about me and I don't care. So if you think about a child from 2 to 7 years old, you can't tell them nothing either. They're having explosions in grocery stores. They're flailing about. They're throwing things around because they want to get their needs met and they do not consider anyone else within this situation. That's why it's pre-operational. Operational, you're able to operate and understand where everyone else is at. Pre-operational, you're prior to being able to collaborate with other individuals. So egocentric, ego, think of them being about themselves, and centric, they're the center of attention for other individuals. So that is where, again, the development of language, memory, and imagination also occur in this stage. So they start engaging in imaginary play. They're able to start understanding things that are outside directly in front of them. So intelligence or thought processes are both egocentric and intuitive And again, egocentric, key emphasis on ego. Again, they're all about themselves. And centric, they're the center of attention for everyone around them. And intuitive type thinking is key emphasis on in. So they start believing in different things around them. So it's all about their emotions. So intuitive is where inside of them, they believe that things are going to happen. So believe in something based on their feelings rather than conscious thought. So they will defend what they think, even when evidence is provided against it. So it's almost such as a delusion of false beliefs not based on reality, even when presented with factual intuition. So that is where you have to understand is intuitive type thinking is you are going to do it based on your feelings, no rational thought within any situation. So false belief, not even based in reality, even when presented with that factual information. So that's why it's hard for them to collaborate with other individuals, is because they think it's all about them, and their thoughts or what they have inside of them is the only belief that everyone else should have with and for their situation. So an example to articulate this a little bit further, imagine a child at a grocery store with their parent. Their parent's like, okay, we're having dinner just after this. We just have to get things for the dinner. And the child sees a candy bar and they grab the candy bar and say, I want this candy bar now. And the child's ready to get wild. Like, I'm about to scream at the top of my lungs in about 5 seconds. If that kid does not have a parent that's willing to check them and challenge them, that child's going to be like, I want it now. And the parent's like, you know what? We're eating dinner in about 5 minutes when we get home. That kid is going to get louder and louder and louder and louder until the parent either one is like, you're not about that life, or two, I'm going to get you the candy bar because I don't want you to cause a scene in the grocery store. So that's why they're prior to being operational, because it's all about them and what they think. The parent could be like, you know what? We have a bunch of food at home, or man, you already have snacks at home. And the kid's like, nope, I want it now, because it's all about what they particularly think within this situation. So the milestones within this stage are magical thinking and symbolic functioning. Remember, sensory motor was object permanence. An object is going to remain permanent in front of the individual. Prior to object permanence, they're like, oh my God, the object's gone. It's forever gone. Object permanence is like, yeah, I just know it's over there, or you're covering it up with a blanket, or man, why do you have your hands on your face? Well, magical thinking kind of goes into that intuition or egocentric type thinking, and symbolic functioning identifies that use of symbols within this stage. So magical thinking, key emphasis on magic. Why? Because they believe that their thoughts have magical powers. And we oftentimes see this within the psychotic disorders of, again, when it's with a child, we're not going to be like, man, that child's psychotic. That child is just imaginative, or they're identifying things that are not in front of them at the given moment. That's that imaginary play. Well, magical thinking, again, has the same definition, though. They believe that their thoughts have magical powers. So it's the idea that one's thoughts or desires influence the environment or situations that they are involved in. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A child thinks that their nightlight will keep monsters away. They're like, you know what? If that nightlight's not on, monster is going to come out from under my bed and going to destroy me at this given moment. It's that imaginary play, but they believe that that nightlight has magical powers that is repelling away monsters in some way, shape, or form. Another example, a child thinks about not having their brother around and their brother ends up in the hospital. They believe it is their fault since they thought about not wanting their brother around. They're like, you know what? I hate my brother. I just wish that he would go away. Well, again, if the brother does go away or does get hurt, the child may panic and say, oh my goodness, it's all my fault. If I would have not thought about X, Y, and Z, I would be in a better position. My brother wouldn't be hurt. Another example, someone heard that drinking honey before taking their ASWB exam would help them pass. They drink the honey and pass, so they believe doing so, aka drinking the honey, helped them pass. So again, magical thinking. You're putting magical powers into something that otherwise does not possess the powers that you say that it does. Again, drinking honey before taking the ASWB exam has zero correlation on whether you're going to pass or not. But magical thinking is, if you drink the honey and pass, you start telling everybody, drink the honey because it's going to help you destroy the exam. Magical thinking. You believe that your thoughts or objects have magical powers based on you thinking that they do. Symbolic functioning on the other side of the river, key emphasis on symbol, because this is where a child is going to allow for a symbol or object to have humanistic type characteristics in addition to that human attributes. So symbolic functioning is where they allow a symbol to function as if it were a human. Stated in a different way, it's when a child learns through the use of mental images and other symbols that are not present. So they imagine symbols have functions not present at this given moment. So this is that imaginary play further progressing within the child. Couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A child sings to their teddy bear to put it to sleep because they have watched other individuals have a lullaby sung to them and they go to sleep. So they're like, I'm going to start singing to this bear because I want the bear to go to sleep. Another example, a child plays doctor to a doll that fell off the bed. They're like, oh my God, my doll is broken. I am now a doctor, so I can repair this doll so it's no longer going to be in pain. Another example, a child utilizes a stick as a sword. They're like, wow. So then now, again, you could get hit with a stick and it will hurt, but it will not cut all the way through you unless somebody is sharpening the sword super sharp, aka the stick super sharp. So it will cause harm. But in this situation, a child's running on with a stick. They're like, oh my God, I'm now like King Arthur, or man, I'm a knight, or man, I'm carrying around a stick. I have a gun. So it's that imaginary play. They allow for symbols and objects to have functions as well as attributes that are not directly in front of us at this given moment. Magical thinking, they believe that objects and their thoughts have magical powers, while symbolic functioning, they allow for a symbol or an object to have functions that are not actually present within the context of the situation. A couple of scenarios to remember this stage. First one, imagine you are babysitting a child and they are pretending to nurse a broken leg on their doll that fell off the bed earlier that day. So it's an example of symbolic functioning in imaginary play, because again, they are allowing for the doll to have humanistic characteristics and saying, you know what, this doll has a broken leg, it's in pain, I now need to mend and tend to this doll or it will die. Another example, playing off of the first example that was in the car. So imagine you're the person in the first scenario with car trouble. The person begins to think that if they were nicer to their significant other that morning, that their car would not have broken down. And a lot of individuals on the planet will utilize this magical thinking of, man, if I wouldn't have said that or did X, Y, and Z, then I wouldn't be in this position. So again, the person that has the car trouble is like, man, my car is about to blow up. If I wouldn't have had an argument with my significant other, I wouldn't have insulted my significant other, or man, if I was nicer to my boss, or man, if I wouldn't have took this job, etc., then none of this would have happened. It's magical thinking because they are putting magical powers on the things that they do and or say that are outside of the context of what is actually happening within the situation. It'd be different than if they're like, you know what, me and my significant other got into an argument, they cut my brake line, and now I can't stop. So me having that argument with my significant other caused my car to break down. Well, in that situation, it's not magical thinking because you're being presented with something that is directly in front of you at this given moment. So quick review on pre-operational. Pre equals prior. So it's prior to them being able to operate with other individuals because the child is thinking only about themselves. They're now able to not just have to experience something or just jump off the top of the dresser to know that it would hurt them. They're now able to operationally think and say, you know what, this symbol equates to this, heights equal pain, so I'm not going to do this. So this is where a child starts associating things together through the use of symbols. Their thinking is egocentric. Ego, think of somebody being high on themselves. Centric, they are the center of everybody's focus. So it's all about them. And they're like, I want what I want when I want it. So again, picture a child that is 2 to 7 years old. They are going to be all about themselves, not really give a crap about anybody, and they just want their needs met. Not to say children from 2 to 7 are bad people. They're just not able to take the perspectives of other individuals. They're now able to start utilizing their imagination, and it's starting to run away with them Egocentric thinking is there. Again, ego, it's all about them. Centric, they're the center of attention, and they have intuitive type thinking of where they're thinking about what's inside of them is what everyone else should believe. So it's believing something based on their feelings rather than conscious thought. Again, kind of closely related to a delusion, false belief not based on reality, even when presented with factual information. So a child can be provided information that their thoughts are incorrect, and they're still going to believe that what they think is right over everybody. Magical thinking, magic, is where they are going to be like, you know what, my thoughts and what I think and what I do have magical powers and influence everyone else around me. Symbolic functioning is where they're allowing for a symbol or object to have functions or characteristics that are not actually present within the situation. The next stage that we're going to look at is concrete operational. So key emphasis on concrete, because when you think of concrete, think of a concrete block and construction. So this is where an individual is going to be operational as it relates to objects around them versus them just having to directly experience something or them thinking that objects have magical powers in front of them. So concrete operational, think of a concrete block or construction because they're now able to collaborate with other children or individuals and have operational type thinking only based on objects. The age range here is from 7 to 11 years old. So this is where the child begins to develop logical or operational type thinking so they can only apply their critical thinking to objects or concrete. So again, they don't have to jump from the top of the dresser and hit the ground to know, you know what, that's probably not going to be a good thing. But this is where they're like, you know what, I can get on top of the dresser, have a mattress underneath of it, and the mattress will break my fall. So therefore, jumping off the dresser is not as dangerous as it once was. So this is where the child can work things out internally in their head rather than having to directly experience this situation. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Rather than punching a wall to know it's hard, they can just imagine that they would break their hand if they punched it. They're like, you know what? That wall over there is pretty stiff and stiff things can hurt me, so I'm not going to have to do it. Another example, not having to touch a candle flame to know it is hot. So they avoid touching it because of what they've heard in the past, or they've watched somebody else do it. They watched a child touch a flame and get burnt. They're like, you know what? I'm not going to do that same exact thing. That's where they're starting to become operational and think about cause and effect type relationships as it is going to be within the context of objects or why things are the way that they are. So this is where a child can begin to play games with real rules because they can see the connection of why they are in place. A child in pre-operational is going to cheat and do whatever they want in the game because they just want to win. Concrete operational, they're able to build things and become operational with other individuals. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. If I get angry and punch that wall, it could hurt my hand. If I do not take turns, then the game is no longer fun. So they're able to see the cause and effect relationships between others and how if they don't follow the rules, nobody is wanting to rep and rock with them or associate with them in any way, shape, or form. So they're more focused on how things work and how they can collaborate with other individuals versus it's all about me, or you know what, I need to experience everything because I don't have experience based on not being able to see other people do it. So the milestones within this stage are conservation and classification. And a lot of times people get these mixed up. Remember, sensory motor, object permanence. If somebody has object permanence, if an object is no longer directly in front of them, they're still able to understand that the object exists. The milestone within the second stage, pre-operational, were magical thinking. They thought their thoughts had magical powers, and then symbolic functioning, where symbols had functions that otherwise were not present. While in this stage, again, concrete operational, think of concrete, they're constructing things. So the two milestones here are conservation and classification. So the first one up to that, conservation, key emphasis on conserve. So if you think of conserving something, it is restoring something or allowing for something to look how it used to look, even though it may have changed within the quantity that used to exist. So conservation is the understanding that something stays the same in quantity even when the appearance changes. So conservation is where you're trying to conserve something and identify that it is still there. So it's the ability to identify properties of categories rather than having to see it as a whole to understand what the situation is. So it's the ability to critically think and construct things with minimal direction. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. So let's say we had 8 ounces of water, we had an 8-ounce bottle and a 16-ounce bottle. If we put the 8 ounces of water in the 8-ounce bottle, it is going to be entirely full to the top. If we put the 8 ounces into the 16-ounce bottle, it is going to be half full. So the child is going to grab the bottle, the 8-ounce bottle, because they feel like it is quote unquote more, because it appears that it is more. So they want the best reward for themselves. But once they get conservation, they're able to start identifying that this 8-ounce bottle is full, this 16-ounce bottle is half full, but it is the same quantity. So therefore, I will take either one of these. So if you're working with a child or you've seen a child that lacks conservation, you could have cookies in front of you. You can have one piece of a cookie that is whole and it is less than a pile of crumbled up cookies, and they would rather have the whole piece because they think it is more. So that is where a child does not have the ability to process that something is different if it appears different without conservation. Another example, let's say we have 6 rows of 2 pennies, so we have 12 pennies, and then we have 2 rows of 6 pennies. So therefore, it looks like one is more if it is vertical than if it is horizontal. So the presentation changed, but the quantity didn't. Conservation prior to that, they would go with whatever presentation looks like there is more in front of them. With conservation, they're able to see something and say, you know what, even though this actively changed, even though it looks different, I know that it is still an entire construction of what exists. So that is where they're able to identify that even though it isn't a whole piece, I can put this together. So for example, let's say we have a Lego set and a child prior to conservation would have no clue what Legos do. A child that has conservation would be like, man, Lego is cool. I'm going to build X, Y, and Z. So they're looking at a manual and they see a pile of Legos and they're able to construct an entire ship. Prior to conservation, they're not able to see that these Legos can turn into an entire ship. The second milestone is classification. So key emphasis on classify. Why? Because this is where a child is starting to put things into classes or classify properties of an object and clump things together, even though they may not look entirely the same. They know that they are associated based on the characteristics that they are identifying. So classification is where they're able to classify or put things into classes based on properties that it possesses. Stated in a different way, it's the ability to identify properties of categories related to each other. So it's the ability to identify objects as they are similar, as well as the ability to categorize different aspects of similar objects. So for example, you have the following objects. You have a red cat, black cat, red flowers, blue flowers, and black flowers. If you notice, there are categories based on color as well as the objects that exist. So the child that has classification would be able to categorize the objects based on colors. So red cat, red flower, blue flower, black cat, and black flower. Prior to classification, they would not be able to put the cats and flowers together. They'd be like, you know what? That's a cat. That's a flower. I see nothing that is the same based on these different characteristics. So classification is they're able to put things into classes and classify things based on things that are similar as well as things that are different. So they would be able to clump the cats together. They would be able to clump the flowers together. And they would be like, you know what? This is exactly what I'm able to see. But they're also able to clump it together based on the color. And if we had different objects, they could be putting different categories. So let's say we had cats that were taller or things that were taller versus smaller. So let's say we had a cat that was super tall. We had a flower that was super tall. They'd be able to categorize the heights based of the objects as well. So classification, they're able to classify things based on the characteristics or properties of the objects that are present. In conservation, again, key emphasis on conserve, because they're trying to conserve something and identify, even if something is not whole, that it could be something, even though we may not actually be able to see it at this given moment. So even though the presentation looks different, the quantity is the absolute same. So a couple of scenarios to be able to remember this stage. First one, imagine you see a group of children playing with some concrete blocks, and one of them throws the concrete blocks at the ground and yells, "Be careful, I'm on a mission and do not want anyone to get an operation." So the kids scatter and run away. So the name concrete operational is exhibited and they see the danger when the object comes. So they're able to think logically of like, you know what? This person's really going to throw this concrete block at the ground. I could get a shard that shoots me in the arm. I'm not about that life. So if we look closely, again, concrete, again, think of an object or constructing something, as well as operation, because concrete operational is where they are going to be able to see an object and see a cause and effect relationship based on that. Another example, imagine kids playing and they accidentally break their mother's face and they try to put it back together. The oldest child yells, "We better fix this or we're going to need an operation." Again, if you've been messing around in the house when you were a child, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're playing and you're like, all right, let's see if we can throw this ball and see if the dog can catch it. The vase hits the ground and you're like, ah. Prior to conservation, you're like, man, we're screwed. We might as well count our days down. Conservation, you're like, oh my God, I see pieces of glass, but we can try and glue it together. So the act of the children being able to see that they can put it back together is conservation. So that is where, again, these two scenarios can help articulate the different components of the stage. So a quick review of the stage: concrete operational, key emphasis on concrete. Think of a block or constructing something, because this is where child is able to start collaborating with other individuals to construct things, or they're able to start seeing cause and effect type relationships based on objects that are present within their environment. So rather than directly experiencing something, they're able to start associating that, you know what, this could potentially hurt me, so I'm not going to do it. Again, sensory motor, they're utilizing the senses and motor activity. So they may get on top of the dresser and leap all the way off and say, you know what, there's no harm in this. But then they're like, oh my God, this hurt. So I'm probably not going to do that ever again. Pre-operational, they're starting to operate, but they're not collaborating with anyone else. So they're only listening to what they think, and they're starting to associate objects with having properties. Well, concrete operational, you're able to start seeing past that and constructing things and seeing things that may not actually be there directly in front of you. The milestones, conservation, think of conserving something. We're conserving a forest. We are not able to see all the trees anymore, but we can see them if we plant them. So if we plant a seed, we know that the trees will come. Classification is where you're starting to classify or put things into classes based on similarities as well as differences. The last stage of PJ is formal operational. So key emphasis on formal. Why? Because if you think of something that is formal, it is put together and it is kind of bougie, if you will. So formal operational, you're able to form a plan and is all the way complete. Operational, you're able to operate with other individuals with formal plans that you are able to come up with. The age range here is 11 years old into adolescence, aka till death. So this is where the child develops the ability to think about abstract concepts versus concrete objects or concepts in general. Again, you're able to think of things that are not directly in front of you, but you're able to think about cause and effect type things, not just based on objects, but based on everything. So the child goes from being able to work with other individuals and only seeing things that are tangible to thinking about intangible things and thinking about results and coming up with hypotheses. So it's the ability to plan for the future versus living only for the moment. So they're stepping out of that YOLO moment and of like, you know what, I need to think about things all the way through. And you're maybe thinking, Phil, you just said this starts at ages 11 years old and goes into adolescence and beyond. Aren't adolescents kind of impulsive? Yes, but they also think about things prior to doing things more so than younger children. So this is where the child or individual will begin to think hypothetically of if this happens, then this other thing can occur. So they can look at a problem and come up with a systematic solution versus just being like, I'm coming in like a wrecking ball and doing whatever feels right. They're able to think and say, if I do this, there could be this consequence. So if this consequence is something that I'm not too afraid of, I'm just going to do it anyway. So that is where hypothetical deductive reasoning is going to come into play within the formal operational stage. So key emphasis on hypothesis or hypothetical, because if you think of a hypothetical situation, it's something that potentially could happen, or you have an idea that if we do something, that this result could occur. And then deductive, so think of you deducting the negative possibilities within your situation. So hypothetical deductive reasoning is where I'm going to hypothetically think about situations, deduct the possibilities that I do not want, and then come up with a more logical solution. So it's the ability to think abstractly through generating predictive measures of a hypothesis. If I yell at somebody, then they could become aggressive towards me. If I spend all my money, then I will not be able to buy this other object. If I lie to people, then I may not have friends. If I skip work, then I could get fired. If I cheat on my partner, then they could leave me. They're able to think things through versus just shooting from the hip and be like, woo, I know what's best for me within this situation. And it's not just based on objects. They're able to start having relationships and collaborating with other individuals. So that is why it's the progressional point of they're not thinking about just things that they can see in their environment of like, man, we knocked that vase off. We may have to put that together. It's thinking about, man, where did the person get that vase? Man, what are the implications of the relationship that I have with the individual if I were to do something that were to hurt them? So this is where the child is going to be able to think through a situation and come up with a solution to decide a better outcome. So they tend to avoid impulse and think things through more logically. That doesn't mean it's a 100% shot because it's impossible for people to avoid impulsive decisions 100% of their days, but it's way different than a child getting on top of the dresser and flying off like Superman or being like, you know what, I can only think about things that are in front of me. They're starting to plan towards the future. So when you think about it, they are going to come up with different hypothetical decisions and think through their life decisions, which allows for them to be able to identify the pros and cons of each solution to analyze the outcome. And this is a lot of pressure for individuals. And that's why it starts at 11 and goes to the rest of their life. Because if you think about it, once a child turns 11 years old, adults in society think that they can be coming up with decisions 100% of their days. Where again, concrete operational, you may give responsibilities to a child based on an object, but you're not going to be giving them an entire array of decisions that they can be making. You're not going into a middle school and being like, you need to decide the career that you want to have. You need to know the job that you want to have. But you can bet your tail once they get into high school age, people are going to start demanding that they make decisions like they're an entire adult. They're like, man, what car are you going to drive? Man, you got to be paying the bills. Man, you got to be paying the insurance. Man, what job are you going to get? Man, how many kids are you going to have? All these different decisions. So that's why formal operational, they are coming up with a formal plan to decide what they want to do. Concrete operational, they're able to be operational with other individuals, but it's only based on objects within the situation. So that is where a lot of times people get concrete and formal operational mixed up. Or formal operational, they're able to come up with an entire formal plan, while concrete operational, they're able to think about how things can be constructed, but not why they're constructed. What are the drawbacks of the things being constructed, and what are the drawbacks of the actions that they are doing? So a couple of the scenarios to remember at this stage. So imagine someone preparing for a formal dance. They think of how they want to go with Susan. However, if he goes with Susan, they will likely have to be home by 10 p.m. So he has to decide whether it is worth going with her or not. So they're like, you know what? Man, Susan is going to have to be home by 10 p.m. Am I willing to sacrifice going home at 10 p.m. and missing time with my friends and potentially being made fun of for missing all these different things? Am I feeling that deep about Susan? Well, if I'm feeling that deep, well, then I would make that formal decision. If not, I'm going to make a better decision for myself. Another example, a child wants to buy a video game from the store that costs $60. The child knows that they can get $30 for an allowance at the end of the week for doing their chores. So therefore, they would need to do their chores for 2 weeks to be able to afford their video game. So formal operational, they're able to come up with a formal plan of like, this is what I want. These are the steps that I need to take. In the prior stages, it's not really going to work out that way. So let's run with that. So sensory motor, they're likely going to be too young to want to have a video game. They're going to be jumping around and doing whatever the heck they want because they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to understand their environment. Once we get into pre-operational, that's where we're going to start seeing potential interest in video game type behavior. So this would be where a child wants a $60 video game and they're having an entire meltdown in the store. I want the game. I want the game. You don't even love me. I need this video game. Even though they have a room full of toys and all the other video games they wanted in the past about 10 seconds ago, they forget all of that and they're like, I want this now. That's it. But once they progress into concrete operational, they're starting to understand that, man, I want this video game, but why am I potentially being told that I can't have it? And they're starting to come up with cause and effect relationships of, man, maybe it's because I have too many video games, or man, maybe it's because I got to share with my other siblings, etc. Formal operational is like, you know what? $60 is a lot of money. Am I willing to sacrifice $60 to get this video game that I may not enjoy? Am I willing to give up 2 weeks of my life to make this happen? So that is how we see that progressional cognitive processing. One individual is able to come up with an entire formal plan. Concrete operational, they're able to start piecing things together, but it's only based on objects. But prior to that, pre-operational, they're prior to thinking about anything but themselves, because that's that egocentric and intuitive type thinking. They're only thinking about themselves. In sensory motor, they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to understand what their environment is like. So couple of mnemonics to remember the age ranges. Stage one is between 0 and 2 when it ends. Ages 0 to 2 is the sensory motor stage. Stage 2 starts at 2 and takes until 7 to become operational. Ages 2 to 7, pre-operational. Stage 3 requires that we pay a fee at our local 7-Eleven made out of concrete. Why? Ages 7 to 11 is concrete operational. Stage 4, we open the door for our date around 11 at the formal dance. Ages 11 and beyond, formal operational. So those are easy ways to be able to recognize and apply the ages. But again, do not fixate on the ages. Understand what the stages mean, because not everybody is going to have that linear path of like, you know what? I'm now 11 years old. I'm now able to come up with formal plans. It could take them a little bit longer to develop those senses. But in addition to that, it all depends on the environment and how they're being reinforced or punished based on those different situations. Because a lot of what we're seeing here can be conditions that we can see of being reinforced and or punished to exercise and do different behaviors. Sensory motor, again, key emphasis on sensory. They're utilizing their senses. Motor, they're utilizing their motor activity to explore their environment. Pre-operational, key emphasis on pre. It's prior to them being able to operate with other individuals that have egocentric type thinking and that intuitive type thinking of like, everything is about me, my feelings, and what I think inside of myself is what everyone else should experience based on I am the center of everybody's I. Once we get into concrete operational, key emphasis on concrete, think of a concrete block, or you're constructing things, you're able to start associating things together and starting to identify, if I don't follow the rules, things aren't going to be fun. So therefore, they're able to start collaborating, constructing things with other individuals. And then formal operational, key emphasis on formal, think of something that is super formal or upscale. They're able to come up with a formal plan and work towards something that they particularly want. So those are different ways to be able to recognize and apply the different stages that we can see and the milestones within each of them. Sensory motor has object permanence. Object, think of something that's solid. Permanence, object permanence is where you're able to see that an object is permanent, whether it's in front of your eyes or not. Stage 2, Pre-operational, we have magical thinking, key emphasis on magic, where you think that your thoughts have magical powers and that you can influence the things around you. Symbolic functioning is where you believe that symbols have functions as well as humanistic characteristics that are not directly in front of you. Concrete operational, we have conservation and classification. Conservation, think of something being conserved. You're trying to restore something to its previous presentation, even though it doesn't currently look at that. So even though the quantity remains the same, the presentation has changed. Classification, key emphasis on class or classify, you're able to put something into a class and you're able to identify the properties of similarity versus the differences that exist. And then formal operational, you're able to come up with a formal plan to be able to work towards something that you particularly want. You're able to come up with a hypothesis. You're able to utilize hypothetical deductive reasoning. You're able to come up with something that is hypothetical, deduct the things that you do not want, and come up with a more informed decision based on what is being presented within the situation. The mnemonic for the age ranges. Stage one is between 0 and 2. When it ends, ages 0 to 2, sensory motor. Stage 2 starts at 2 and takes until 7 to become operational. Ages 2 to 7, pre-operational. Stage 3 requires that we pay a fee at our local 7-Eleven made out of concrete. Ages 7 to 11, concrete operational. In stage 4, we open the door for our date around 11 at the formal dance. Ages 11 and beyond, formal operational. So those are easy ways to be able to recognize and apply the concepts, the stages, the ages, and the different milestones that exist within Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. But again, don't feel like you have to memorize everything. Don't feel like you have to cram it all in. But the goal is to be able to recognize and apply and identify where these different characteristics or where these different stages can fall within the exam. So it's never, ever, 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 ever about memorizing, but being able to recognize and apply it so you can go into the exam, you can get directly in the chest to get the job done. Let's segue now into the different concepts that are also associated with Piaget that people oftentimes get mixed up. And those are assimilation and accommodation. So there are different forms of adaptation to new stimuli. And these are associated with Piaget. It's not a part of the cognitive developmental theory. So that is why it's getting its own component within the session. So each of them are very, very different, but we can utilize the same technique to be able to recognize and apply. And that'll make sense in about 10 seconds. So the first one up to bat is assimilation. So if we look closely, we can identify SS. And what I always tell people is SS is where the client stays the same. So assimilation is the client stays the same regardless of what's being introduced. But if we look closely, we can also identify the word similar. So assimilation is where somebody will be similar to who they once were, even though something new was introduced. So assimilation is SS because the client stays the same, or they are similar to who they were prior to a new idea, behavior, or activity being introduced to them. So assimilation is adding a new idea, behavior, or activity into a person's life, and their identity is not lost from the introduction of the new component. That's why it's SS, is the individual stays the same, because regardless of what is being introduced to them, they are the same person. So they are similar to who they were prior to the introduction of whatever the new X is within the situation. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A chef learns a new recipe. So the new recipe does not change the fact that they are a chef. It simply makes them a little bit different. So let's say we have a chef that does seafood, and they're like, you know what? I'm really great at seafood. And they're like, you know what? I now want to start making burgers within my restaurant. So they're like, you know what? I'm going to start learning all these new burger recipes, and I'm going to have my seafood expertise still, but I'm also going to have this burger component added into my seafood restaurant. They are still a chef, but it makes the restaurant look very different than it once did. They're like, you know what? We only do seafood. And now they're like, you know what? We're now going to be doing beef and turkey and all these different types of burgers, as well as seafood. You would be a little confused if you went to the restaurant with the change, but it wouldn't change the entire restaurant because the individual just learned something new, but they are still who they are, AKA a chef. Another example, a person begins taking yoga classes, yet they still continue all their normal activities. So the person begins taking the yoga classes, but it does not consume or change their entire identity. And they're not, quote unquote, categorizing themselves as a yogi. They're not like, you know what, yoga is my entire life now, and I'm going to stop doing this and become a yoga instructor. We see that happen to a certain number of people, but assimilation is they're staying the same. They just added that new activity. They're like, you know what, I like doing yoga, but I'm still going to have the same career. I'm going to still have the same identity. I'm still going to have the same friends, etc. So it didn't consume who they once were, and it didn't take over. Another example, Eddie starts attending Phil's Sunday study groups, yet he still will utilize the information in a way that complements his learning style. So Eddie obtains new information, but it allows for it to complement who he is rather than taking over. So he's not starting to be identifying as me. He's not like, you know what, anytime that I start studying, I need a backwards hat on. I need to be flopping around. I need to be explaining exactly the way that Phil does it. I just need to identify how is the information? How does it make sense for me? And I still have to stay who I am. And that's what we oftentimes see happening is somebody will add something new in and they may accommodate who they are. But assimilation is where you add something new in to your situation, but you stay the same of who you are prior to the introduction of it. Not in a negative sense of like, man, you're hard-headed and never want to change. It's just you still want to pass the exam. You just added a new style into your situation. So that's where it complements who the person is versus taking over. So assimilation, SS, the person stays the same. So they are similar to who they were prior to the introduction of whatever was introduced, whether it's you being taught a new skill, whether it's you starting to do a new behavior, or it's you being included into an activity that you otherwise had no clue existed. On the other side of the river, accommodation in the same position as SS, we have CC, because CC is where the client changes. So assimilation, they're going to be the exact same individual. Accommodation is where they are going to change who they are based on whatever new thing was brought in. Stated in a different way, it's changing or altering current schemas, so thought processes, in response to new information. So that's where the person entirely changes. So if we utilize the examples we have right now, chef learns a new recipe, this is where somebody would stop doing seafood and entirely become a burger type chef. They're like, you know what? I'm now going to be a different chef. Or, you know what? I'm now going to own different restaurants. Or, you know what? I no longer want to be a chef because I started taking yoga classes and now I'm going to be a yoga instructor. Or, you know what? I'm starting to attend Phil study groups. And now that is the only thing that I'm particularly going to use based on the fact that it works better for me. So the individual changes their life based on something new that was introduced to them. So stated in a different way, somebody gets new information, a behavior or activity is introduced to them, and they change who they are based on the new X, whatever was introduced into their life. So that is where, again, accommodation isn't always a negative thing if it is a more positive result for the individual. If it is something that they're just kind of being dragged into, but they don't realize it, it's like, they are accommodating or compromising who they are for who they once were. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Somebody believes that all dogs are bad since they had a bad experience when they were a child. So when the individual got older, they had a good interaction with the dog and it changed their schema to believe that not all dogs are bad, just some of them. So the accommodation here is the change in perspective about dogs due to a new experience with them. So prior to this point, regardless of how big the dog was, they're like, whoa, that dog's aggressive. Even though the dog's just chilling, has its tongue out, it's like on its belly, ready to get it scratched. They're like, whoa, that thing's about ready to kangaroo kick me right into the chest and kill me. And they're like, dude, just take it easy. But once they gave the dog a chance and pet the dog, they're like, man, this is really great. This dog is nice. So maybe not all dogs are bad, just some of them. So that's where accommodation can help individuals that are experiencing repression. Shout out to Freud, that defense mechanism where your mind will press things down and you're not able to understand why the things that you do them. Another example, a child knows that clowns have red hair. So when they see someone with red hair, they believe it is a clown. However, with exposure to people with red hair, they begin to realize that not everyone with red hair is a clown. And if you think of a child, they don't have that separation. They'll say whatever they think. So if you have red hair and they've seen somebody that was a clown that had red hair, they may be like, man, that's a clown over there. Look at the clown. And then you're looking like, man, this child is calling me a clown. The parent may apologize and say, man, he means no harm. He doesn't know any better. So the accommodation would be that the child over time goes, you know what? Everybody with red hair is not a clown. Clowns may have red hair, but just because somebody has red hair doesn't mean that they are a clown. So that's where they start changing what they thought in the past and upgrading to where they're at today. Another example, Phil begins making YouTube videos and offering individual tutoring sessions to people who are struggling to pass their ASWB exam. Phil begins to cut out watching sports on weekends to form study groups to reach more people. So Phil's identity shifted from somebody that's like, man, I love sports and man, I'm going to watch every sports game and team to, you know what? My new sport is watching people go into the exam to kick a Dracula in the chest to get the job done. So the accommodation is Phil cuts sports to host study groups to reach more people. So his identity shifted. Went from, man, I'm like a super sports fanatic to, you know what? My new sport is watching people kill the exam. So again, shifting behaviors, shifting identity based on something that was introduced in the situation. Accommodation, CC, is where the client changes based on whatever was introduced to them at that given moment. Assimilation, SS, is where the person stays the same or they are relatively similar to who they were, regardless of what is being introduced to them at that given moment. And again, there can be positive attributes about each of these, but knowing how they can look is the battle that we need you to win. So assimilation, SS, is where the person stays the same. So if you're looking at a question and somebody is introduced something and they stay the same, that is where we're seeing assimilation. Accommodation, CC, if something is introduced and somebody starts changing who they are, what they do, and what they say, that is where we start seeing accommodation existing. So those are easy ways to be able to recognize and apply both assimilation and accommodation. Let's segue now into Kohlberg's theory of moral development. This theory oftentimes blows people apart because there's so many different levels and layers to these, and there's overlap in between each of these. So again, don't try to memorize these, but being able to recognize and apply them are going to be ways for you to go into the exam and kick a Dracula in the chest to get the job done. So when it comes to Kohlberg, there are 6 stages and 3 levels. Each level is going to have 2 stages. So that's where the level is going to have 2 stages. So that's why there's 3 levels and 6 stages. Each level is going to determine how we categorize that view within society. So level 1 is pre-conventional. Again, pre is prior. So this is prior to somebody having a conventional way of conducting themselves in society. So quote unquote, the norm. So level 1 is where individuals are going to be focused on themselves and prior to collaborating and having a conventional way of thinking. Morality, moral compass. So pre-conventional morality is they are prior to having a conventional type of morals that would exist within society. So stage 1 is obedience and punishment orientation. So key emphasis on obedience. Why? Because if you think of somebody that's obedient, they listen. Punishment, key emphasis on punishment. Why? Because this is where somebody is going to be obedient to somebody that they know and admire in their life in order to avoid punishment from the individual that they know and or admire. So that is where somebody is going to listen to a person that they admire to avoid being punished in some way, shape, or form. If they are punished, they have done something that that person they know and admire is not something that they want that person doing. So it's also known as pleasure versus pain. Somebody is going to avoid pain and again, do what they are being told. But if they find the activity or thing so pleasurable, they will do it anyway and enjoy the consequence that they get as it relates to that. So obedience and punishment orientation is where somebody is going to be obedient to somebody that they know and admire to avoid being punished. And this one is going to be relatively similar to another stage that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And when we get to that one, I'll draw the parallel. But just knowing that it is when a person behaves in a good manner to avoid being punished by somebody that they know and admire. So if the person is punished, then they must have done something wrong based on the person that they want the acceptance from. So the person avoids doing particular behaviors to allow for acceptance from a person of authority that they know and admire. So that's the key attribute there, is it's a person of authority in that person's life, not a person of authority in society, because we're in pre-conventional. So it's prior to having a conventional way of conducting themselves in society. So they're obedient to a person that they know and or admire in order to avoid punishment from that individual. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A fourth grade girl refrains from running in the hallway in order to avoid being punished for breaking the school rules. She's like, you know what? You're not going to catch me running in the halls because I'm not about to be the kid that's the troublemaker in school. But again, if somebody was on that punishment side of like, screw that, I would rather get to class and start talking to my friends and get in trouble for running in the halls. So that would be where they're willing to accept punishment and avoid being obedient to somebody that they know and or admire. Another example, Phil puts his dishes in the dishwasher after dinner rather than just in the sink to avoid being yelled at by his wife. Again, Phil's like, you know what? Screw the dishes. I don't really care about those things. But he's like, you know what? I would rather put that dish in the dishwasher after dinner and avoid being yelled at by my wife. And that's an example of somebody that you know and or admire, or somebody that is a person of authority in your life. I can't be incarcerated for not putting the dish in the dishwasher. I can just be scorned by my wife because she's like, you know darn well that the dish does not belong in the sink. It goes in the dishwasher. And I say, you're absolutely right. Even though I may not want to, it's like, it's better to be obedient and avoid the punishment than to get punished for not doing something as minuscule as putting the dish in the dishwasher. But again, I cannot be incarcerated for not putting the dish in the dishwasher. I can be yelled at and guilted, and it's bad news, bad vibes. But again, the dish ends up in the dishwasher at the end of the day. Another example, a young child behaves themselves at the relative's house to avoid getting their iPad taken. The kid may not care about behaving at their family's house, but they're like, you know what? I would rather behave myself and get to keep my iPad than to cut up, get my iPad taken, and then I'm outside of what I want. So again, obedience and punishment orientation is where the person will be obedient and listen to a person of authority, a person they admire and or know in their life, to avoid being punished in some way, shape, or form. So the fourth grade girl is avoid being punished for running in the hall. Bill is putting the dish in the dishwasher to avoid being punished by his wife. The young child's like, you know what? I don't even really care if I cut up at my relative's house, but man, I really like my iPad. So I better listen to my parent, because I know if I don't, that iPad is not going to be in my hands. So obedience and punishment orientation is you're obedient in order to avoid being punished by a person that you know. The next stage is a little bit more progressional from obedience and punishment orientation, which is going to be individualism and exchange. So key emphasis on individual, because the person is going to be focused on themselves, and they may do things that they otherwise would not have done, but it's in exchange for the greatest amount of reward for themselves. So it takes it a step further. They're not just obedient to avoid being punished, they're obedient to get a reward for themselves in some way, shape, or form. So that is where a person will recognize there's more than one way of doing things correctly, and often will cling on to the response handed down to them by a figure of authority. However, this individual starts learning that different individuals have different rules that they will follow depending on the environment. So that's where you will have a child that will act differently around one parent than the other parent. And it's all dependent on how that parent conducts themselves. So let's say we have a child that they know if they are going to make a mistake, they're going to talk back, they're going to do something outside of character. They do it in front of a parent. That parent's like, I'm not about that life. And darn well you behave yourself at your relative's house. You're not going to talk back. You're not going to be running all around. You're going to behave yourself And you know darn well, let's say that parent's more authoritarian or authoritative. And let's say we have a parent on the other side of the river that's more passive and it's like, you can do whatever you want. So this kid is jumping all around, flying like they have a cape on. They're talking back. They don't really respect the parent. So that would be where that child is identified. I can sacrifice a little bit for this parent that's going to let me do whatever I want. But this other parent, man, I know darn well that I got to behave myself. So that is where these rules are based on their own values, morals, and views of the world. But again, that is why they will start pitting people against one another, is because interest begins to shift towards rewards rather than trying to avoid being punished for their behaviors. So effort is made to secure the greatest possible reward for themselves. So that is where, again, they are going to do what the figure of authority wants them to do, but it's not out of genuine interest for that person of authority, because obedience and punishment orientation was like, you know what? I am not going to step outside of character based on I am going to be punished by the individual. However, individualism in exchange is like, I'm still going to be obedient, but I'm now going to start making that shift and I'm going to have different rules based on the environment that I'm in. And it's going to be based off the greatest amount of reward that I can get for myself. So interest is now like, you know what? I need to get as much as I can for myself. And I'm going to listen to other people, but it's not out of the pureness of my heart. It's so that I can get the greatest amount of reward. Because again, to avoid being punished is obedience and punishment orientation. So effort is made to secure the greatest amount of reward for themselves. So the person will begin to conform the rules and principles to benefit themselves. It's not because they want to be a good person, not because they want acceptance from somebody, but they're like, I'm going to get mine. So the easiest way to be able to recognize and apply individualism in exchange is you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And I'm sure that you have individuals in your life that operate out of individualism in exchange. They will never do anything for another person unless they're getting a favor done for them. And they're like that tit for tat type individual. They're like, man, I ain't ever going to help that person. They never be helping me out. That's an individualism in exchange. But you know, darn well, if you got that friend, if you ask them for a favor, you're about to cash them out or have an IOU type behavior. They may bring it back up out of the archives like, man, back in 1990, remember when I helped you do X, Y, and Z? They're going to be remembering the favors because it's you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. They never do something on the kindness of their heart. They're always looking for something that they can gain within their situation. But that's, again, obedience and punishment orientation is where they're doing it to avoid being punished. Remember, going back to the examples, the fourth grade girl refrains from running in the hallway. Why? In order to avoid being punished by the school rules. They're like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. Individualism in exchange in this context would be, she's like, you know what? I'm not running in the halls, but I'm not running in the halls because I know I can get a reward such as candy or whatever affirmation. So I'm going to not run in the halls, but they know darn well that they're going to give me a reward for not running in the halls. Phil puts his dish in the dishwasher after dinner. He's like, you know what? I ain't just doing this out of kindness. You're going to owe me a favor. In obedience and punishment orientation, it's like, yes, ma'am, I'm putting that dish right in the dishwasher. You ain't about to catch me not doing what I said I was going to do. And again, the fourth grade girl's like, you know what? I'm not running in the hall. Individualism in exchange would be like, man, I put that dish in that dishwasher. What favor am I about to get? Not get knocked out? No, I'm just kidding. But that would be individualism in exchanges. I'm going to do something in order to get a reward for myself. And a young child behaves at their relative's house, not because they want to. In obedience and punishment orientation, it's like, man, I don't want to be punished. Individualism in exchange, they're like, man, if I behave myself at my relative's house, I may get McDonald's. I may get to have a friend come over, whatever that looks like. So individualism in exchange, they're starting to come up with a barter system of, I'll do something, but I better have a reward after it. Obedience and punishment orientation is, I'm going to be obedient because I'm not going to get punished. I know what that feels like. Individualism in exchange is, I'll give up a little bit of my individuality, but I better get something in exchange. So in a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further, a child may help their parents do dishes, even though they do not like doing so, in order to have their friend stay the night. Again, The child is going to do the dishes, not because they want to, not because they want to be polite, not because they think it's a good idea. They don't even like doing it. They're like, man, screw the dishes. I ain't doing those. But why they're doing it is because they get their friend to stay the night. That is the reward that they're doing. That tit for tat. I do the dishes. I get my friend to stay the night. I don't do the dishes. I don't get my friend to stay the night, but I'm also not being punished. Another example, someone may not want to study for their ASWB exam. However, they know that they will have a higher likelihood of passing if they study. So someone does not want to study for their ASWB exam. They're like, screw it. I don't even want to do it. It's not what I like to do. However, they know that they will have a higher likelihood of passing if they study. So therefore, they're like, you know what? I'm going to give up a little bit of my individuality and I'm going to do something that I don't want to do in order to get the result that I want, aka going to the exam, kick it directly in the chest and living the life that I want to see for myself. So they will give up part of themselves in order to get a reward that is larger than they would have gotten without doing the behavior. Another example, someone watches a movie with their significant other, even though they do not want to make them happy. So someone watches a movie with their significant other. So that is what's done, even though they do not want to. They're like, you know what? I hate that movie. I'm never watching that movie ever again. But they're like, you know what? I would rather do that because I want my partner to be happy. It's not to be avoiding punishment, but they're like, you know what? I watched this movie. I can bring this up and I can do something that I want to do. And that significant other will have to do it based on the fact that I did something that I didn't want to do. It's that tit for tat. You know what? Remember when I watched that movie with you? We can do what I want to do this evening. Da 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 da. And again, if it's a collaborative partnership and it's not maladaptive and toxic, you may end up being able to do that. But again, that's bad moves, bad vibes, because again, you're only doing something so that way you can get a gain out of it. Should be out of that pureness. Quick review of individualism in exchange, as well as obedience and punishment orientation. So quick review of level 1, pre-conventional. Pre is prior, so it's before conventional. Think of it just being a way that you're conducting yourself in society. Stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation, is where you're obedient in order to avoid punishment from a person of authority that you know and or admire. So you know that if you don't listen to what this person tells you, you're likely going to be punished. So therefore, you listen to what the person tells you in order to avoid punishment in some way, shape, or form. Individualism in exchange is where you're now going to start doing things, even though you may not want to do them, in order to secure the greatest amount of reward for yourself. So you sacrifice a part of your individualism, but it's in exchange for a larger reward than you would have gotten if you did not do the behavior. So that's where interest begins to shift from not just avoiding punishment, but how do I get cashed out? How do I get a reward in some way, shape, or form? So effort is made to secure the greatest amount of reward for themselves. You scratch my back, I will scratch your back, but and just know that I'm going to need a favor after I scratch your back as well. So it's that perpetual cycle of I do something for somebody, but it has to be I'm getting something out of it. Never are they going to do something for somebody else and it just be out of the pureness of their heart. So that is level 1, pre-conventional morality. Level 2, we just took a mushroom and leveled up. Level 2 is conventional morality. So think about a conventional type living. So this is where individuals are going to start conducting themselves and collaborating through society because they're also going to be collaborating with other individuals. So stage 3, conformity and interpersonal accord, or good interpersonal relationship, is where you're going to start, again, key emphasis on conform. You're going to conform in order to be associating with particular groups of people. So conformity and interpersonal accord is where you conform in order to have interpersonal relationships with other individuals. So I'm going to conform and start doing things that individuals want me to do, not because I don't want to be punished, not because I want to have something given to me, but I want to fit in and have other individuals tell me that I'm a good person. So conformity and interpersonal accord is where you're going to conform to what other individuals tell you. But in addition to that, you want to have good interpersonal relationships. And that is where, again, Kohlberg is just a lifelong type situation depending on the environment that you're in. So conformity and interpersonal accord is going to be all the way around of you may conform to certain environments in certain ways of doing things, but the purpose is so that way you start having relationships with other individuals. So this is where the individual is good in order to be seen as a good person by others. So key emphasis here is they seek approval of others based on their actions. So this is where somebody may do something for somebody else, but they're like, man, I need to get my credit from all these other individuals. Or, man, you need to start telling people that I'm a good person. So they conform in order to be viewed as a good person. So this stage is categorized as the good boy or good girl level because they are doing things to get acceptance from those they value. So effort is put forth to secure approval or maintain friendly relations with others of interest. So that is where, again, it makes that shift from not just avoiding punishment, not just getting something in exchange for something, but in addition to this, they want to be viewed as a good individual and they want to secure approval from those that they value. If the individual does not value the other individuals, they don't really want to conform to everything. So they're not chameleons, but they want to be seen as a good person by others. So that is why they are doing the things that they are doing. That is where their moral compass is. They're doing things just because they want other people to see them as a good person. So that is where they will be acting in a way that will allow for acceptance from people that they deem important, and oftentimes will lead to sacrificing one's own values and morals. So they take a back seat to what they think because they want other individuals to give them affirmation or confirmation of who they are today. So conformity and interpersonal accord is where I start to conform to the rules, values, and morals of a group of people in order to be accepted by them and for them to think that I am a good person. Obedience and punishment orientation is where I would be obedient to a group of individuals to avoid being punished. Individualism in exchange, I would listen to what a group of individuals would have to say, but they are going to be giving me something in exchange for my ability to listen to what they have to say. Conformity and interpersonal accord is I'm going to listen to what a group of people say in order for them to accept me based on me doing what they told me to do. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Stealing is bad, and if I steal, then my friends will consider me a bad person. So I do not steal. So the thought process here is stealing is bad. You know what? Stealing is bad. And if I steal, my friends will consider me a bad person. So the person may want to steal. They may be like, man, I'm about to steal all this stuff. But in their mind, they're like, you know what? Stealing is bad. My friends always say people that are steal are bad people. So therefore, if I steal, I'm going to be viewed as a bad person. But the individual wants to be accepted, so they are not going to steal. They're like, you know what? I want to steal so bad. I know my friends think it's bad, so I'm not going to do it. So they suppress their own needs and urges in order to conform or be accepted by a group of people. Another example, someone thinks that driving drunk is a bad behavior, so they avoid doing so to ensure people will not consider them a bad person. So someone thinks that driving drunk is a bad behavior. That is the thought process here. So they avoid driving drunk. And it's not because they think it's a good idea. So it's a way for people to not consider them a bad person. They want to get behind the wheel after getting intoxicated and be like, woo! But they're like, you know what? People could see me as a bad person. So I'm out. I'm not doing that. So that is where they may have urges to do things, but they're going to suppress them in order to get acceptance from other individuals. Another example, I feel unmotivated to study for the ASWB exam, but the people I hang around are studying, so I study to avoid being rejected by them. So I feel unmotivated to study for the exam. The people I hang around are studying, so they're like, you know what? We're ready to get into the exam to kick it directly in the chest to get the job done. So I'm like, man, I ain't about to be rejected in this situation. You know darn well that I'm about to get that exam done. So you may not even want to study. You're like, you know what? I'm not studying. It's out for me. But people around you are like, man, we studying hardcore. So you're like, man, I'm going to start studying, I suppose, in order to avoid rejection from those individuals. Another example, I do not feel like I need to lose weight, but everyone around me is starting to eat healthier to lose weight. So I begin eating healthier to avoid judgment. So I do not even feel like I need to lose weight. I'm like, you know what? I'm at a healthy weight. I feel great. But everyone around me is starting to eat healthier to lose weight. They're like, you know what? This is what we're doing. So in this situation, I start doing it to avoid judgment. I may not want to, but I'm like, man, I ain't about to be on the outside. Man, I love eating salads too. Man, like I don't even like pizza like that. I don't eat those foods. But on your own, you're like, thank Lord, they're gone. I can start eating whatever I want because you're only doing that in that environment to get acceptance from those individuals. So conformity and interpersonal accord is where you conform to the rules and expectations of a group of individuals in order to avoid being rejected in some way, shape, or form. And that's why it's conventional morality, because we're conforming to what society tells us to do, whether we think it's a good idea or not. So that's where we start stepping away from what we want and start doing what other individuals tell us to do. The next stage is authority and social order. And this is the one that I was talking about when I was discussing obedience and punishment orientation. So, authority and social order, key emphasis on authority. In authority in this context is where we are going to do things and listen to people of authority, aka the police, and maintain social order based on the actions that we do. So, authority and social order is where we are going to listen to what society tells us to do in order to avoid being punished. But the sole purpose is to avoid being punished by people of authority in society, aka us becoming incarcerated. So, that is where obedience and punishment orientation is where you're going to be obedient in order to avoid punishment from an individual that you look up to and admire to. Well, authority and social order is where you're going to be obedient and listen to the rules and laws of society to avoid being incarcerated or arrested. That's why when I was like, man, I ain't about to get arrested for not putting my dish away in the dishwasher. But let's say I have the urge of like, man, I'm about to commit a DV act of like, man, my wife yells about putting that dish in the dishwasher. I'm about to put her through the dishwasher. That would be if I had a flash of light, I was like, man, I'm about to do this action. But authority and social order would be like, man, you could get incarcerated and arrested. Do you want that to occur? And that individual, if they did the action, would be like, screw it. I'm ready to do whatever I want. Authority and social order would be like, man, I ain't about to put her through the dishwasher because I ain't about to get arrested. So that's the main difference between obedience and punishment orientation and authority and social order. Obedience and punishment orientation, I avoid doing an action to avoid being punished by a person that I know and admire. Authority and social order is where I'm going to do an action to avoid being arrested in society. Stated in a different way, the person becomes more aware of the wider rules of society, so judgment is concerned with obeying the rules in order to uphold social order and avoid guilt of breaking the rules. So that is where it's making that shift of I have to obey the rules at all cost. I'm not just going to be like, you know what? I make the rules and do whatever I want, or I'm just going to listen to this group of people. Authority and social orders, I'm not going to just listen to the people that I hang around. I'm going to listen to all of society to avoid disrupting social order. So orientation or conduct begins to shift from getting approval from others to more fixed rules. So even if my friends are breaking the rules and laws, I'm not going to break them to avoid disrupting social order. So that is where we're going to come in to more fixed rules. We're going to have that rigidity within our lives. So the purpose of morality is maintaining the social order and looking to maintain interpersonal accord to encompass and benefit the entire society. So that is where we're going to start shifting from. We're going to start shifting from just affirmation and acceptance from other individuals to how do I maintain interpersonal accord and how do I benefit the entire society? Not just, man, I need to hang around these group of people and whatever they tell me, I'm going to start doing what I particularly need within this situation. So that's where your group of friends may want to break the law, but you're looking and saying, I ain't about to do this. So this is where the person obeys the laws and fulfills societal obligations and duties to maintain social systems. So this is where rules are rules, regardless of the restrictions of my actions. So even if I disagree with the rule or law, I'm going to follow it in order to maintain social order for everybody. That's why Coburg doesn't really have set age ranges, because everybody's different philosophies and the ways that they conduct themselves depend on where they're at in their life. Because if you put somebody into a situation, they may act in a different way than they would if they were not in such a stressful situation. So, in certain circumstances, you may break the law, even though it could get you arrested or incarcerated, because you want to benefit what your family or what situations you need to improve in your situation. So that's where people can wax and wane into these different stages depending on the environments and situations that they are in. So that's why it gets really complex depending on where you're looking at within Goldberg's. And a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. I'm personally against violence, but would never protest at the library without permission. So that's where I'm personally against it, but I'm not going to do it because I could be arrested. Another example, I'm personally against the attendance policy at work, but still check with my boss before violating the policy. So that's where, you know what? I'm against this work attendance policy. It's crap. It's stupid. But I'm like, hey, do you think I could really take this day off because I may violate the policy at the work? And you're like, man, you're going to get arrested for violating a policy? Not necessarily, but you could get fired from your job, which would disrupt some type of social order within your life. Another example, I am late for work. And if you've been in this situation, you know exactly what it feels like. And you feel pressure to speed in your car. If you're somebody that lives outside of authority and social order, you're like, man, my foot's getting a little bit heavy. I'm ready to slap the gas and start going over the speed limit. Somebody that is in authority and social order, they're going to say, you know what? I'm not going to speed. I'm going to drive the speed limit because I don't want to get a ticket. So that's where, depending on where people are at in their situation. But let's say we spin this situation of, you know what? Your child, parent, or somebody that's important to you is in a dire situation. You may say, you know what? I normally wouldn't speed in my car, but I'm ready to slap the gas and go 100 to make sure that they are all right. So that's why it's all dependent on the situation. And age ranges aren't really relevant for Kohlberg because everybody develops and everybody reacts to situations in different ways. So that's where, again, in authority and social order, somebody's late for work, they feel pressured to speed like, man, I really could get to work if I slapped over the speed limit. But somebody that lives within authority and social order, they're like, you know what? I'm just going to drive the speed limit. Me being late's not that big of a deal. But if you're somebody that is outside of authority and social order, you're ready to slam on the gas and say, I'm about to get to work. So that's how you are going to see authority and social order. So a quick review of level 2, conventional morality. And it's conventional because this is how you are going to have relationships and conduct yourself within society. Stage 3 is conformity and interpersonal accord. So this is where somebody is going to start associating themselves with other individuals and listening to what they have to say and doing what they tell them to do, not because they want to avoid punishment, not because they want the greatest amount of reward for themselves, but they want other people to look at them as a good person and they want to get approval from those other individuals. So effort is put forth to secure approval or maintain friendly relations with others of interest. Authority and social order is where somebody is going to obey people of authority, aka the police, and maintain social order in order to avoid being arrested or incarcerated for going against what society deems to be appropriate. So this is an individual that is going to be looking at how they can benefit everybody by not breaking the law. And this is an individual that is going to always be rules are rules, regardless of the negative consequence on themselves. They're like, you know what? This is just how the world works. And I'm never going to push back on anybody in any way, shape, or form. And that's where a lot of adults are going to fall within the conformity and interpersonal accord and authority and social order type realms. But after authority and social order, they don't really move on to the next level, and not to say they're bad people, but the majority of humans on Earth are not going to make it to level 3. Level 3 in this situation is post conventional morality. So if we think about post, think about beyond or after. So this is outside or beyond a conventional way of conducting yourself in society. So stage 5, social contract and individual rights, key emphasis on contract. Think of a binding agreement. So social contract is where somebody creates a contract within their own mind in order to advocate for the individual rights of those that are not getting their needs met in some way, shape, or form. So social contract and individual rights is where somebody sees an issue or concern within their own community and they start advocating in order to rewrite the rules and laws to benefit those that are not getting their needs met. That's why level 3, a lot of times people are not going to get to this level because they oftentimes are just thinking about themselves and not breaking the law. So stated in a different way, this is where the person becomes aware that while rules are important and exist for the good of the greatest number of people, there are times when they go against the particular interest of individuals. And we've seen this throughout our careers. So since some laws and rules are against the interest of people, action is needed to dismantle the unjust system. So therefore, we're looking at it and saying, you know what? There are things in society that will go against a particular segment of the population. And people are not getting their needs met, they're actually being more oppressed. So since there is some good within laws and or rules, that doesn't mean that we have to follow them or kind of put everybody into a template. This is where people will start to behave in a manner that will help impact others within their society. And it's within their society. So it's not the entire world or universe. It's individuals that are like, you know what? I see a problem and I'm going to help improve my community in some way, shape, or form. So they may step outside of the social norm if it can benefit their community, their community, their community, their community, their community in some way. And I'm driving that home because there's another level that is going to try and benefit every single person on the planet. So social contract and individual rights, key emphasis on individual rights. This person is trying to advocate for the rights of singular individuals within their community. So mutual benefit and reciprocity for everyone that is involved with the change. So what that looks like is the social worker is getting fulfillment for the things that they are doing, and they are advocating for their community in some way, shape, or form. So that is where morally right and legally correct do not always equate to the same thing. So that's where, again, sometimes people are like, man, I'm never going to break the law. I'm never going to overstep, and I'm just going to fall in line and listen to what people tell me. So that is where morally right and legally correct are not always the same. So ulterior rules makes everything better for everybody. So that's where somebody is going to find an alternative way of doing things and make the rules and laws work for every single individual in the same way. So that's where somebody within this stage is going to have a genuine interest in the welfare of others. They are concerned with individual rights in being morally correct. They're not worrying about what society is saying. They're like, I'm going to pave my own way and I'm going to do what has to be there. I'm going to create my path. I'm going to pave it, and I'm going to allow for my community to get their needs met, even though the system may oppress them, even though the system may push back onto them. I'm still going to advocate and fight for the rights of the individuals within my community. So that's where the social worker creates their own contract and has a binding agreement to improve the individual rights of the people within their community. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Oskar Schindler during World War II. So if you've not heard about the story or if you've not seen the movie about it, Oskar Schindler was an individual that was employing Jewish workers during World War II in Germany to allow for them to escape being put into concentration camps. And that is where they were creating war parts. And ironically, he had them create faulty war parts to kind of sabotage the German army. So Oskar Schindler was like, you know what? I'm going to open up these jobs for individuals within this particular population, aka Jewish workers, because Jewish workers were put into concentration camps. He didn't open it up to everybody in the world and like, hey, you need a job, come work at our factories. Oskar Schindler was like, you know what? This is going against the interest of this particular group of people, and they are being oppressed and hurt and killed. So therefore, I'm going to put my own self on the line and be morally correct and even go against the law. So I'm going to employ Jewish workers during World War II. Another example, social workers seeing a client that is not scheduled to ensure that they are stable. And if you've been in this boat before, your client's like, you know what? I'm going to 100% not see a client. I'm going to hold on, do self-care, take my lunch, and I'm going to take care of myself. But then you see that a client's unstable, or you see a client that needs help, and you're like, you know what? I'm now going to jump into action to help this client. You're not opening it up to every single client on the planet. You're only trying to improve this particular individual's rights. Another example, someone does not have enough food to eat, and a restaurant worker gives them extra food, even though it is against the rules. So the restaurant owner's like, no extra food. We toss it in the dumpster. That's it. This worker's like, man, this person looks extra hungry. I'm about to give them all the extra food that we got. I'm willing to put my job on the line, and I'm willing to advocate for this individual to get their needs met in some way, shape, or form. They didn't open an entire food bank. They focused on this particular individual, aka they're trying to benefit their own community. So social contract and individual rights is where somebody is going to create a contract in order to advocate for the individual rights of people of their community. The last stage, again, second stage within level 3, post-conventional morality, it's beyond what would be conventional within society, is universal principles. So key emphasis on universe. Why? Because it takes it a step further, and this person is going to advocate for every single person in society, every single person in the entire universe. So this person has developed their own set of rules, morals, and guidelines for how things should be run in society. So they're not just advocating for individuals within their community. They're not just trying to equalize the gaps or do any of these particular things. They're like, you know what? I need to help people in the best way that I can, and I'm going to advocate for people's rights to be the best possible version of themselves. So that is where this may or may not align with the law. So the person is focused on human rights, social justice, inequality, and equity. Inequality, key emphasis on equal. Why? Because everybody gets the same thing. Equity, think about equate, because they are going to make it an equation that is going to be balanced. So equality, everybody gets the equal amount. Equity, people get what they need to balance the equation. So the person is prepared to act and to defend the principles, even if it means going against the rest of society to enforce and promote the overall good of people, the overall good of people, every single person on the planet. So again, social contract and individual rights is you're advocating for the rights of single individuals, while universal principles, you're advocating for the overall good of every single person. So the person will behave in a manner that will benefit the entire universe, the entire universe, the entire universe, the entire universe, and they are willing to break the rules and or laws to do so. So they attempt to make new universal laws to benefit everyone, 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 everyone. Universal principles is where you're trying to advocate for every single person in the universe. So it's based on the thought that the person is willing to pay consequences for their actions of disapproval, which could mean imprisonment. They're like, I'm willing to put my life and my entire rest of my life on the line. So they're like, you know what? I'm willing to go against society, the rules, the laws, and anything. And you could put me in prison, but I will not let other individuals be oppressed. I will not let other individuals have a disadvantage. And I will not let other individuals not get the rights that they particularly need with and for their situation. So universal principles, they're advocating for every single individual on the planet. When we had social contract and individual rights, we were trying to advocate for particular individuals, and they were attempting to equalize the gap in a particular area. While universal principles is I'm wanting to change every single individual on the planet. So this is where they're looking at a more global perspective of shooting for human rights, social justice, and equality and equity. Equality, everybody gets equal of everything. Equity, everybody gets what they need in order to balance the equation of society. So equity may not be giving people everything the same. Some people may get more, but it helps to balance the equation. So universal principles is that we're trying to promote the overall good of people, and we're trying to change and make sure that every single person on the planet gets a benefit and allows for them to become the best possible version of themselves. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. And like I said, not a lot of people are going to get the chance to get into level 5 or stage 5 and stage 6 of stage 5 is going to be that social contract and individual rights, and stage 6 is going to be universal principles. So the first example of stage 6 universal principles is Martin Luther King Jr., who's advocating for the rights of every individual on the planet, who wanted everybody to have only what they needed, but also not be judged based on one attribute, aka the color of their skin, but everybody got what they needed with and for their situation, and everybody would have the opportunity to become the best possible version of themselves, willing to put the life on the line, willing to be incarcerated, and willing to do what he thought was right in order to balance the equation of society. Not just equality of everybody getting the same thing, but the equation of society was being balanced. The next example, Gandhi was willing to fast and put his own life and have peaceful protest in order to stand up for his country getting their needs met and getting independence in some way, shape, or form. Wasn't just like, all right, it's only just my community. It's like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that my entire country is not being discriminated against, not being controlled in any way, shape, or form. So that is where, again, it steps past just my community and it goes for every single individual on the planet. Martin Luther King Jr. was advocating for every single person in the country to get equity and to get their needs met. Gandhi was advocating for every single person in his country having peaceful protest, in addition to getting independence for the country. And the last example is not a real person, but if you've seen John Q, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, I would definitely recommend, because it's a good movie. Denzel is a father that is wanting their child to get an operation, but the hospital and insurance company will not pay for it. So Denzel is putting everyone in the hospital in a hostage type situation in order for not just his child to get the operation, but he wanted every single parent on the planet to never have to go through what he went through. And he was holding everyone hostage in order for his child to get his needs met. But in addition to that, in order for parents to never have to sacrifice or have insurance prevent somebody getting the care that they needed. So that is why I said stage 6 universal principles is one that people don't really ever get the capacity to move on to, or even stage 5 of social contract and individual rights. So a quick review of Kohlberg, starting from the absolute beginning. Level 1, pre-conventional, is prior to someone having a conventional type way of conducting themselves in society. Stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation. Somebody is going to be obedient in order to avoid punishment from somebody that they admire and or know. And just keeping in mind that Kohlberg's does not really have age ranges, because depending on the environment and situations people are put in would depend on how they are going to behave. Stage 2 is individualism in exchange. So this is where somebody is going to sacrifice a part of their individuality in exchange for a greater amount of reward, or the greatest amount of reward possible for themselves. So they have that you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back type mentality, or tit for tat of, if you do something for me, I owe you a favor, but if I do something for you, you owe me a favor as well. Then we level up and go to level 2, conventional morality. So more of a conventional way of living within society. Stage 3, conformity in interpersonal accord or good interpersonal relationship, is where somebody is going to conform to the ideologies or thought processes of a particular group of people that they deem important in order to be accepted by those individuals. So therefore, they're going to be doing behaviors or speaking or conducting themselves in a way they otherwise would not have done if they did not want to be accepted by that group of individuals. Stage 4, authority and social order, is where somebody is going to respect people of authority and avoid breaking the law and or rules of society in order to maintain social order. So that is where obedience and punishment orientation sound relatively similar. However, authority and social order is where you could be incarcerated for stepping outside of what authority is telling you to do, while obedience and punishment orientation is where you're going to simply be punished by somebody that you know. So this authority and social order is essentially rules are rules, and no one is going to step outside of what the rules are within society. The last level, post-conventional morality, camps on post, think of beyond. We're beyond what society would expect us to do. Stage 5, social contract and individual rights, is where somebody creates a contract within society and advocates for the individual rights of people of their community, of people of their community, people of their community. They still attempt to get people's needs met. They try to equalize the gap in a particular area. They're concerned with the individual rights and being morally correct. So they're still willing to sacrifice their identity and who they are for the benefits of their community, but it's only for their community or the rights of single individuals. Well, stage 6, universal principles, is where somebody is willing to advocate not just for their community, but every single person on the planet or every single person in the universe. So they're striving on a more global perspective of trying to achieve equality and equity. Equality, camps on equal, everybody gets equal of everything. Equity, people get what they need to strive and thrive to be the best possible version of themselves. So they get what they need to equalize the equation in society. And this individual is willing to give up their own selves in order to benefit the entire universe. And they are willing to be imprisoned or incarcerated in order to achieve the goal of everybody getting their needs met in some way, shape, or form. So those are easy ways to be able to recognize and apply the concepts of Kohlberg's moral development, and understanding that you don't have to memorize everything. You don't have to jump yourself around. You don't have to get yourself riled and dialed up, but being able to recognize and apply the concepts of Kohlberg's theory of moral development in a way that makes sense for you, or if you were to see it inside of a question to go into the exam to kick it directly in the chest to get the job done. The next and last theory that we'll go over is Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. And a lot of times people get this one mixed up because there are so many components and so many things that are going back and forth. But just keeping in mind that this one is kind of progressional, but the ages are not the most important thing, because it's not what the ages are, it's what the individual is doing and what the specifics of the stage are as well. So a mnemonic to remember the stages within Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development are as follows. So the first one is focused on the quote unquote positive side: trust autonomy to initiate the industry, identify intimacy, and generate integrity. On the failure side, or the negative side, mistrust, shame, guilt, and inferiority can cause role confusion and makes someone isolate from stagnation, which leads to despair. So each word in these mnemonics is going to equate to half of a stage. So when you put it together, you have the entire sandwich. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust. Second one, autonomy versus shame. So if somebody's able to trust another individual and they're able to have freedom, they are then going to move on to initiating things on their own. If somebody has mistrust, they have shame about who they are going to feel guilty asserting themselves within situations. If somebody's had trust, they've had autonomy and freedom within their own environment, and they've been able to initiate things on their own, they are then going to move on to the industry, and they're going to start collaborating with other individuals. If somebody's had mistrust, they have shame about their needs, they feel guilty asserting themselves, they are going to feel inferior to those around them within the situation. If somebody's had trust within their environment, they've had autonomy or freedom to have somebody navigate them through life. They've been able to initiate projects on their own. They've been able to punch the clock in the industry. They are then going to start identifying who they are and what they want to see. If somebody's had mistrust, shame, and they feel guilty asserting themselves, they feel inferior to other people around them, they're going to have role confusion. They're going to be confused who they are and where they are at. If somebody's had trust, they've had autonomy or freedom to explore their environment, they've been able to initiate projects, they punch the clock at the industry, they've identified who they are and where they want to go. They will then try to move on to have an intimacy with another individual outside of their family. If somebody's had mistrust, they have shame about who they are. They feel guilty, having needs. They feel inferior to the people around them. They are confused who they are. They will then isolate from other individuals because they don't feel like they are good enough within the situation. If somebody's been able to trust other individuals, they've had autonomy or freedom to explore their environment. They've been able to initiate projects. They've punched the clock at the industry. They have an identity of where they want to go. They have intimacy or love from other individuals. They will then start generating for future generations that will come after them. So that's where generate is going to come from. So that's generativity versus stagnation. Because if somebody has had mistrust, they feel shame about who they are, they feel guilty asserting themselves, they feel inferior, they're confused based on who they are, they've isolated themselves, they will then feel stagnant or behind other individuals that are at the same point in life. If somebody's had trust, they've had autonomy to explore their environment, they've initiated projects, they punch the clock at the industry, they have an identity of who they are and what they want, they have intimacy with another individual, they've generated things in their life, they will then have the milestone of integrity with and for their situation. So that is where they're going to graduate onto having that integrity. So therefore, if somebody had mistrust, they feel shame about who they are, they feel guilty asserting themselves, they feel inferior, they're confused about who they are, and they isolated themselves, and they feel stagnant, they will then have despair within their life. They're going to feel nothing they've done is worthwhile in any way, shape, or form. So those are the two mnemonics that if your back is against the wall and you want to utilize it in the exam, it could be a helpful way to do it. First side or the positive side, trust autonomy to initiate the industry, identify intimacy, and generate integrity. The negative or failure side, mistrust, shame, guilt, and inferiority can cause role confusion and makes someone isolate from stagnation, which leads to despair. Each one is going to provide half of a stage within Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. The first stage up to bat is trust versus mistrust. On the trust side is where a child is going to be able to trust that their parent and or caregiver is going to take care of their basic needs and allow for them to survive and strive in their environment. The mistrust side is where somebody's not going to get their needs met. They're not going to have a parent and or caregiver that is looking out for their best interest, and that's going to create a disconnect or attachment disconnect within the situation. And the age range here is 0 to 1 years old. But again, the age is not as important as the specifics of the stage. Because if you're in a question and you see somebody that has trust issues or they are able to trust other individuals, you're going to be looking at trust versus mistrust, regardless of the age. So stated in a different way, this is where the child begins to gain confidence and build trust based on the feedback from their caregivers. So the child is very questionable of what others will do for them. So they are unsure whether they'll get their needs met or not. So we have a child that is crying and alerting the parent that my diaper is wet, I need to be changed. Trust is that the child's like, wah, wah, and the parent is going to change their diaper or feed them in some way, shape, or form. Mistrust is where parents like, you just got to let them cry it out. It's not a big deal. Just let them do what they do. That is where mistrust is going to be born because the child is like, I'm not sure if my parent and or caregiver is going to take care of me when I need it. So this is where the child will attempt to keep a close relationship to their parent and or caregiver. If the child is not getting their needs met, then they will adapt and overcome, aka isolate themselves away from the parent and or caregiver and try to strive and thrive on their own. So trust is where a child is able to establish a sense of security and confidence in their ability to maintain safety. So a child is able to understand that their parent and or caregiver will be there for them and get their needs met in some way, shape, or form. A negative or failure, aka mistrust, is where a child will have a sense of fear around the world due to their needs being unmet. So the lack of safety and or security can cause heightened anxiety. When they're in a situation where they have a need, they become increasingly anxious of how am I going to get this taken care of? Because nobody in my life is looking out for me in some way, shape, or form. So the child is unsure whether they can trust their caregiver and or parent to take care of their needs. So trust is where a child or an individual has a need and they know that the person that they are asking help from or the people around them will ensure that they're getting their needs met in some way, shape, or form. Mistrust on the other side of the river is where a person or child is unsure whether the parent and or caregiver or their environment or friends are going to help them if they are in a time of need. Trust is where somebody is able to count on other individuals. Mistrust is where they're not able to count on other individuals and they have to take care of themselves in some way, shape, or form. So if somebody is able to establish trust and security and know that they're going to get their needs met, they will then have autonomy or freedom within their environment. Woo! They're able to roam around their environment and know that their parent and or caregiver is going to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen to them in some way, shape, or form. So that's where somebody's autonomous. They're able to navigate their environment safely without getting hurt. If somebody's had mistrust or they're unaware of whether they're going to get their needs met or not, they are then going to have shame when they are in an environment of where they have to initiate something on their own. So autonomy, they're able to roam around their environment and the parent and or caregiver will give them feedback. While shame is where the child is like, why am I not good enough? Why am I never getting heard? Why am I never going to be good enough? And everybody is just feeling like I'm a bad person. So they feel shame about what they do and who they are. So if they alert the parent and or caregiver and they're ignored, they're like, I'm not good enough and I'll never get my needs met in some way, shape, or form. So what this stage is going to look like is the child begins to roam away from their parent and or caregiver, yet they keep them close by for security. So that's what autonomy is going to look like is I know that if my parent or caregiver is around and I fall, they're going to help me out. If I do something incorrect, my parent and or caregiver is going to let me experience that, but they will not let me get all the way hurt. On the other side, this is where the child begins to assert independence by walking away from their caregiver and making decisions such as picking out clothing, food, and or activities. So this is where ideally the parent and or caregiver will provide feedback on the child's performance, which will lead to more independence and confidence in the future. So if a child is able to trust their parent and or caregiver, they do a project or a drawing or whatever, and they show it to the parent, and they're like, yay, that's really great. You're really awesome. The child is going to gain confidence that they can do things and that they're good in some way, shape, or form. In the absence of the parent and or caregiver providing feedback, aka the mistrust side, the child will begin to adapt and make decisions for themselves or cling to other people to make decisions for them. They're like, I cannot make a decision for myself. I never make sound decisions. Nobody cares about me. I'm going to start doing what other people tell me to do because I can't trust my parent and or caregiver, and I can't even trust myself. So that's where the shame factor comes in of, you know what? I feel bad for even being a part of this environment. So I'm going to change who I am and focus on other individuals. So a positive and or success within this stage is the child gains a sense of confidence in their abilities to choose what is best for them. So the child is able to start making decisions for themselves and will work towards operating on their own. Again, autonomy, think of freedom. Woo! So the child knows that they can try new things and have someone they can count on to protect them and provide feedback to them. So that's that trust factor. You know, the parent and or caregiver is attuned to your needs. You're more willing to have freedom and roam away from the parent and or caregiver, but keep the parent and or caregiver in eyesight of, man, if something bad happens to me, my parent or caregiver is going to come in and make sure that I'm a-okay. A negative or failure, on the other hand, is where somebody has mistrust. They're not able to get consistent feedback or any feedback at all from their parent or their caregiver, and they feel shame about who they are. The child begins feeling anxious and unsure of their abilities and may rely on others for assurance and allow for them to make decisions for them. Why? Because the child questions what they are doing and can become dependent on others to make decisions for them. Because if I listen to what somebody tells me and I do what they tell me to do, they want to have me around. Well, guess what? I'm going to do what they tell me because at least I'm getting my needs met in some way, shape, or form. So this is where the child will become confused when put into a situation that they have to decide for themselves what they want to see. Because if they have to make a decision for themselves, they almost get panicked of like, what do you mean you don't have an opinion? What do you mean that no one's going to tell me what to do? It's because they don't want to make a mistake, because they view that if they make a mistake, that they're going to continue to be rejected in some way, shape, or form. So if somebody has been able to establish trust and they know that their parent and or caregiver is going to adhere to their needs, they've been able to have freedom or autonomy to roam their environment and get feedback from their parent and or caregiver or other individuals. They then will start taking initiative within their environment. They're going to start doing things on their own and initiating things in order to gain a sense of accomplishment. On the other side of the river, if somebody's had mistrust, they never really had anybody they can count on. They've inconsistently got their needs met or have not gotten their needs met at all. They've experienced shame about who they are. They then will feel guilty if people start focusing on them, or they'll feel guilty if they're not able to connect with other individuals. So initiative versus guilt is where a child is going to start taking it a step further, not just getting feedback from their parent and or caregiver, but they're going to start initiating projects on their own and accomplishing things on their own as well. While guilt is where somebody is going to feel guilty if people want to focus on them, and they will start doing what other people want to do and supporting other individuals. And the age range here is 3 to 6 years old. But again, do not just focus on the age, but understand the specifics of the stage relative to what you can see inside of questions. So this stage is where the child begins to play activities for themselves and will begin to share and play with other children as well. So they develop a plan, they carry it out, but they can also start collaborating with other children. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to build this sandcastle, but I also want my friends to come around. So that's where they start taking an initiative. They don't need their parents or caregivers or other individuals telling them what to do, but they also want to share the activity with other individuals as well. So the child begins to engage with others and attempts to seek out friendships. So the child begins completing tasks on their own and develops a sense of accomplishment around their efforts. So autonomy is where they roam in their environment, but they have their parent and or caregiver ready to help them out. Initiative is where they start going away from their parent and or caregiver and doing what they feel is right. So the child will begin to explore different activities, engage their interest around them. If the child has not been supported in previous stages, aka they've not really been able to trust their parent and or caregiver, they felt shameful about who they are, and they feel guilty asserting themselves, then they will feel guilty engaging in activities for themselves and often distance themselves from others or allow for others to guide the activities. Again, they will take a back seat, and in order to fit in with other individuals, they would rather have other individuals control the activity and them get acceptance versus them sharing their opinion in some way, shape, or form. So positive and success in this stage is that the child develops a sense of confidence in their abilities to engage and fit in with their peers and or with others. The child will develop connections with and relationship with other individuals, and the child will perform actions on their own, which allows for them to increase their level of independence. So that's where they start doing things on their own, aka taking an initiative and doing what they think is right. A negative or failure on this stage is the child questions their abilities to engage with others and may isolate themselves or become easily angered, anxious, or depressed when put into a situation where other individuals are collaborating with other individuals and they're kind of isolated from those people. So the child will depend on others to guide them, and they may believe that they are a nuisance to others. So somebody that is in initiative versus guilt will say, I don't want to bother anyone. And that's why I say ages don't really matter, because every single person that's listening to this at one point in time has likely said, I don't want to bother anyone. Or you've had a lot of stress going on in your life and you could have easily reached out to somebody, but you didn't. But once that person found out that you were in trouble, they're like, why didn't you tell anybody? And you said, well, I didn't want to bother anyone. I didn't think anyone would care. Well, that's you living in the initiative versus guilt, but you had guilt that you had needs and you didn't think that other people would respect them in some way, shape, or form. However, if somebody's been able to trust other individuals in their environment and get their needs met, they've been able to have autonomy and freedom within their environment, they were able to take initiative and get reinforced within what they do, they are then going to punch the clock at the industry and collaborate with other individuals. However, if somebody's had mistrust and not really gotten their needs met, they feel shameful about who they are. They feel guilty sharing their needs and getting their needs met. They then would feel inferior to those around them in their environment. So industries where, think of the industry, they're punching the clock at the factory on that assembly line. They're going to be working with other children and individuals to accomplish a particular goal. Inferiority is, you know what? I'm not going to be able to be on a team. I don't really fit in well with anybody, and I'm less than anybody else around me. Stated in a different way, the child begins to develop a sense of pride around their accomplishments. The child will initiate projects and see them through completion. And the child will seek out peer relationships based on similar interests to gain a sense of connection with others. And that's where they are going to start seeking out relationships based on similar interests. So that's where, again, think of the assembly line. They're punching the clock and they're trying to construct something that they both want to construct. So the child will begin to take on projects in particular areas of interest to advance their skill level to work towards mastery. So the child is able to work effectively with others and is able to follow rules rather than controlling their situation. You want to reference back to PJ, it's that segue from pre-operational to that concrete operational. They're able to concretely come up with a plan and follow it and collaborate with other individuals. So if the child has not been able to connect with others in the previous stages, then they will continue to distance themselves from others and feel less capable than their peers. So they're not able to collaborate with other individuals because they don't feel like they're good enough. They may be the best person on the planet at doing whatever this is, but if they're not in the right environment, they may feel like they're inferior to every single person around them. So industry is where they're going to be punching the clock at the industry, working with other individuals at the assembly line, aka accomplishing a particular goal, while inferiority is, I'm not really good at anything. And even if they are good at something, they're willing to shoot down all of their accomplishments and stoke other people's fires for fear that if their fire is too hot and or shines too bright, that people are going to turn away from them. So a positive or success in this one is the child is able to make connections with others and take a sense of pride in their projects that they complete. So the child's confidence is increased and they continue on their mission to independence. So the child will begin to feel productive and feel a sense of drive when they are working on their goals. That's the industry. They're in the industry, punching the clock on the assembly line and collaborating with other individuals. While a negative or failure is where the child begins to feel less than or inferior to their counterparts and will doubt their ability to complete basic tasks, even though they are capable of them. Like I said, they are willing to shoot themselves down, even though they're capable, so that way they don't stand out. So the child will begin to isolate themselves from their peers and feel like they are less than them, which may cause them to engage with peers who are not as positive for them, because everybody is deeply rooted to have connection. So if somebody feels like they're not getting acceptance from a certain group of people, they may start associating with quote unquote bad influences, and that could really taint the child or individual where they're at. So a child will have increased anxiety around other individuals. So if somebody's had trust in their environment and they knew that they could get their needs met, they've had autonomy and had freedom to make a decision within their environment. They've had initiative and taken an initiative within their life. They punch the clock at the industry. They then are going to shift into identity versus role confusion. So they are then going to create an identity within their environment. If somebody's had mistrust, they've felt shameful about who they are. They feel guilty asserting themselves and getting their needs met, and they felt inferior to those around them. They are going to experience role confusion or be confused who they are and what they are actually capable of. Because if they're not recognizing and experimenting with what they're capable of doing, they're then going to tell them that they're not great at all. So identity versus role confusion is going to be 12 to 18 years old. But again, do not just focus on the age, but understand what the stage means and what it could look like within somebody's life. So identity is where somebody starts to recognize what they're good at, what they're not good at, and what is possible within their situation. Stated in a different way, it's when somebody will seek out activities that they normally would not engage in to begin developing a sense of what works for them and what does not. So they attempt to find their strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, someone joins the football team when they've never tried it to see if they like it and they are good at it. So, this is where, think of that high school years or even college years, or even right now at whatever age, somebody is trying a new activity to see if they're good at it. Not everybody is going to be destined to go to the NFL, regardless of how much they want it. So that's where they start to identify, what am I good at? What am I not good at? So the person begins to identify what they are capable of doing versus what they would like to see for themselves, which at times do not equal. Why? Because again, think about it. Majority of people have a goal that they want to do, but sometimes life doesn't work out that way. So again, when I was a young lad, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to the NFL. But again, life had a different plan of like, okay, well, you're only going to be 5'7" and you're going to weigh 150 pounds. You're going to get killed on the football field. You're just going to have to be super fast. So it's like, okay, well, I want to be an NFL player, but physically, I'm not at that point. So therefore, it does not equal. So that's where people in identity versus role confusion, they tend to have reality test them within society. So that's where the person is able to work with others and connect with others to continue growing in particular areas of interest. So on the assembly line, they're like, boop, 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 boop. Let's start working at this. But then they start maximizing, what am I actually good at? So if someone has not or has been unable to connect with others in the previous stages, then they will continue to have confusion around making decisions or what interests they actually have, because then they kind of chameleon themselves throughout their life so far. If I don't really have interest, I'm just going to go with the interest that people tell me that I should have based on the fact that I just want acceptance from somebody in some way, shape, or form. So a positive or success on this stage is someone will identify a specific path that they would like to take in life. What career do I want? What social groups do I want to be a part of? What is my economic situation? What do I want my economic situation to look like? What do I want to look like? The person will identify who they are and where they would like to go in the future. So that's where, again, identity versus role confusion, they're going to identify where they want to be in life. A negative or failure here is someone does not develop a sense of identity and relies on to others to tell them what is best for them. So the person is unsure of their purpose or what skills they even possess. So the person will mold themselves to any expectations that people place on them to get acceptance from them. So this person has no clue who they are. They have no clue what they like, but they're just going to do what everyone else in their life is telling them to do for the sole fact that they've just been kind of putting themselves into situations that other people have told them that they are good at. So this is where you may have somebody, let's go back to the football example. Let's say somebody did not want to play football, but their parents pressuring them to play football because they feel like that's what every individual should be doing. So that is a time where they have role confusion of like, man, I don't even know if I like this, but I'm going to do this because it could create a connection with my parent and or caregiver that otherwise was not there. So that's where they're confused on what they're good at and what they're not good at, but they rely on other people to tell them what they should do. So if somebody has experienced trust and they're able to count on their caregiver and or parent to take care of their needs. They've had autonomy to explore their environment and have gotten positive feedback. They've been able to take initiative and complete tasks. They punched the clock at the industry and collaborated with other individuals. They've created an identity. They then would identify and seek out intimacy outside of their family unit. If somebody has experienced mistrust, they have shame about who they are. They feel guilty asserting themselves. They've been in a situation where they're like, man, who am I? What am I supposed to do? I'm inferior. I'm confused on who I am. They are then going to isolate away from other individuals. So intimacy versus isolation is focusing on somebody seeking out relationships outside of their family. They're like, you know what? I need to get outside of this familial connection. I'm going to get intimate with another individual. Isolation is I'm going to isolate from my family as well as other individuals because I do not feel like I'm good enough. So the age range here is 18 to 40 years old. But again, do not bank on the ages, but understand what the stages mean relative to the questions that you can see on the exam. So intimacy is where someone will begin to seek out relationships or connections with people beyond their family. So someone will begin practicing what they would like to see for themselves in life. So that's where they're going to mix and match with a lot of individuals throughout their life of what do they like about partners, what don't they like about partners, and what do they like and who do they want to be with. So someone will do a lot of experimenting in relationships to identify what is important to them. Because if you think back to yourself in adolescence or even earlier on in your life, you may have prioritized certain things, but now in this day and age, you're like, man, I don't even know what I was thinking. These are the characteristics or attributes I should have been looking for. So the person will attempt to develop relationships and connections beyond their immediate family members, which means they want to seek out an intimate partner. So if someone has struggled in the previous stages, they have mistrust, they've not really been able to count on other individuals, they feel shameful about who they are, they feel guilty, they felt inferior, they're confused about who they are, they're now going to isolate. So that is where they will continue isolating themselves from other people to avoid establishing connections with them. So that is where you start seeing somebody just aloof or kind of moving away. So that is where isolation, they may not physically isolate away from somebody. They may cognitively isolate away. So what I mean by that is just because it says isolation, don't think of somebody that's just evaporating into thin air. Think about somebody that is physically in a relationship, but they're emotionally or cognitively absent from that relationship. And we'll get into that when we look at the negative and or failure side. So positive and success is when somebody feels comfortable seeking and maintaining relationships and can accept rejection from others. That's a key component because rejection is a natural process within life. But if somebody is not comfortable with rejection, they may have had previous experiences that exacerbated anxiety or fear related to rejection. So this individual is comfortable with a sense of commitment and can care for somebody else. It's not just about me, but they're able to think about the needs of other individuals, and the person is able to think about other people and not just about themselves. That's what intimacy is. You are taking an interest in other individuals and getting closer to them based on what they mean to you and what you want to see within your life. Negative and failure on the other side of the river is someone has a sense of self-doubt and they will feel like they do not belong with others. So they lack a sense of connection in areas they deem important. So just because somebody is isolating away, they have a perspective of what they should be doing and where they should be and what they should look like, but they are not meeting those expectations and they avoid intimacy at all costs to avoid being rejected. They're like, you know what? I'm not even going to take my shot because I don't even want to feel that type of pain. So the person will feel lonely, anxious, and depressed. So the person may find themselves in codependent relationships and or used by other individuals. That's what I said, is they may physically be present with another individual. However, they may be cognitively or emotionally disconnected because in a codependent relationship, it's the person so focused on the other person that they want that other person to get their needs met and they neglect their own needs in some way, shape, or form. Or they find themselves in non-mutual relationships and they're always getting people to take from them and never wanting to pour back into them. So if somebody's experienced trust or that they are able to get their needs met from the people within their life, they've been able to have autonomy and roam their environment and get feedback from other individuals. They've taken an initiative. They punch the clock at the industry. They've also started to identify who they are as an individual. They've gotten into intimate relationships outside of their family. They then would start having generativity or starting to think, how can I generate towards future generations? However, if somebody's had mistrust, they feel shameful about who they are. They feel guilty asserting themselves. They felt inferior. They're confused about what roles they have within life. They've isolated themselves. They then would have stagnation or feel stagnant relative to what other individuals are doing within their life. So generativity versus stagnation is where somebody is going to start identifying who they are, what they want career-wise, and how they can start building for future generations that come after them. So stated in a different way, somebody will begin to establish a career and settle down with their family. So they develop a sense of being a part of something that is bigger than themselves. So they develop a family and network of people that they show pride in being a part of. It's not just they have a ton of people around them, but they're satisfied with the relationships that they have. So someone will begin to develop ways to advance the lives of others and will think outside of themselves to do so. So they're thinking not just about how they can get what they want, but how can I start building towards the future for other individuals? So this is where someone believes that they are capable of more and want to empower those around them to have a better life and outlook on things. And the age range here is going to be 40 to 65 years old, but this could be at any stage of the game. Somebody could be 26 years old and be in generativity versus stagnation, and somebody can be in 80 years old and never reach generativity versus stagnation. So that's where, again, do not try to memorize the ages, but understand what these stages mean relative to what you can see within inside of questions. Because if someone continues to struggle in the previous stages, then they will feel like their life is not meaningful and that they are not making an impact on the lives of others. So they compare themselves to others and feel bad about themselves. They're running somebody else's race and they're getting exhausted when they're not even focusing on what they wanted with and for their situation. So a positive or success in this is where someone will have a fulfilling career and happy home life. The person will develop positive connections with people that they are happy to know, not just because they have a ton of people around them, but they're like, man, I'm so glad that I have this close-knit group of people, or I'm glad that I know all these people. So they are attempting to empower the next generation in the family so they will continue to give back to others in a healthy manner. They're not having people just taken, but they're trying to generate enough, not just for themselves, but to hand out to other individuals. And negative or failure within this stage is someone that does not value what they do and feel like they're not contributing to society. So the person lacks a sense of self-esteem and connection with others. So the person will have anxiety and depression, and the person will avoid any opportunity to be a part of a community because they do not feel like they're worthy enough, and they're always going to compare themselves to other people in that community, and it's going to be a forever battle of them not being enough. So they overcompensate and try to buy affection or love from other individuals. They're not fulfilled with who they are, so they feel like I have to give and give and give and give and give in order for people to accept me in some way, shape, or form. So if somebody has experienced trust and got their needs met, they feel a sense of autonomy. They're able to be free and explore what they think is right. They're able to take initiative. They're also able to punch the clock at the industry and collaborate with other individuals. They've been able to identify who they want to be. They've had intimacy with somebody outside of their family. They've also started to generate everything that they particularly wanted to see. They will then have integrity based on who they are and what they have done. If somebody has mistrust and they've not gotten their needs met, they feel shameful about who they are. They feel guilty expressing their needs, in some way, shape, or form. They felt inferior to other individuals. They've been confused about who they are and what role they have within their life. They've isolated themselves and they felt stagnant. They will then experience despair. In this stage, typically is 65 years and older, or any point in life, because again, it's not about the age, it's about the specifics of the stage relative to the questions. So integrity versus despair is when someone will start to slow down productivity and begin to reflect on their life's work and accomplishments. So someone will begin to reflect on their life and deem it to be worthwhile, or like they could have done more. They're like, man, we did all that we possibly could. But it could also be like, man, we hurt a lot of people, we didn't help a lot of people, and I wasted a lot of time. So someone will explore their accomplishments or wrongdoing and absorb the feeling surrounding it. So a positive or success here is someone feels like what they've done has helped advance their career field, as well as empowered or enabled other people to do the same. So they take pride in their efforts and strive to do more. So the person continues to grow and develop themselves into the best possible version of themselves. A negative or failure within this realm would be someone feels like what they have done is not enough and like they have wasted their time and potential. The person may experience a lot of self-doubt, regret, and resentment. So the person will stop trying to grow because they feel like their life was wasted and that there's zero potential within their life to make a change. So those are the stages of Erickson's psychosocial development. So that is what we're particularly looking at as we are moving into them. Let's do a quick review. We'll do a mnemonic for the ages, and then we'll get into some questions. So again, each of these could have any different age range because, again, depending on where somebody's at in their life, depending on the relationships that they're in, the ages are not as important as the specifics of the stage. Trust versus mistrust. Trust is where somebody's able to trust that their parents and or caregivers are going to adhere to their needs. Mistrust is where somebody's not able to trust their parents and or caregivers to take care of them or for them to look out for their best interest. Autonomy versus shame. Autonomy, think of freedom, because they're able to be free and roam their environment, yet get the support and feedback from their parents and or caregivers. Shame is where they don't feel like they're good enough and nobody wants to pay attention to them and that they have to take care of themselves. Initiative versus guilt. Initiative, think of somebody that's taking an initiative and starting things and following them all the way until completion. Guilt is where somebody feels guilty expressing their needs or people focusing on their needs because they don't feel like they're important or that people are going to genuinely want the best interest for them. Industry, think of somebody punching the clock at the industry and working on the assembly line. So this is where children and or individuals are going to start collaborating together and creating connections based on mutual interest in accomplishing goals together. Inferiority is where people are going to look at other individuals and what they're doing and feel inferior and allow for other people to navigate and guide them if they are collaborating on a team. Identity versus role confusion. Identity is where somebody's going to identify what they would like to see for themselves. Role confusion is where they're confused based on what role they want to see in their life. They're used to people telling them what to do, and they just kind of comply with what other individuals expect of them. Intimacy versus isolation. Intimacy, think of somebody having an intimate partner outside of their family. Isolation is where they're going to isolate themselves away, either physically and or mentally and emotionally. So what it would look like is somebody could be in an intimate relationship, yet they're in an abusive relationship, codependent relationship, and they're not focusing on their own needs. Generativity versus stagnation. Generativity, think of somebody generating something. They've already identified where they want to go and they're working towards where they potentially could be. They're not just trying to get what they want. They're trying to generate enough for future generations. Stagnation is where somebody is stagnant. They're not really moving where they particularly want to be. They don't feel like they're good enough and like they are not actually accomplishing the goals that they had. Integrity versus despair. Integrity, think of somebody that's being honest. So they lived an honest life of what they particularly wanted to do. Despair is where they're in pain and they don't really have satisfaction for the things that they've done. So those are easy ways to be able to recognize and apply the different stages of Erickson's psychosocial development. So those are the 8 stages of Erickson's psychosocial development. So mnemonics for the age groups, because a lot of times people are like, man, Phil, you said it doesn't matter what age it is, but I want something that I can hang my hat on and to feel good about. Well, there are a couple ways to be able to recognize and apply the ages. So stage 1 starts at 0 and ends at 1. Trust versus mistrust is 0 to 1 years old. Stage 2 is between 1 and 3, because autonomy versus shame is 1 to 3 years old. Stage 3 starts at 3 and ends on the double, because initiative versus guilt is 3 to 6 years old. Stage 4, the industry starts at 6 and breaks at 12, because industry versus inferiority is from 6 to 12 years old. Think of them taking a lunch break at 12. Stage 5, adolescence, is when identity is confusing. Why? Because identity versus role confusion is from 12 to 18 years old. Stage 6, 18 to 40, is a lovely time to isolate. Why? Because intimacy versus isolation is 18 to 40 years old. Stage 7, if you generate enough from 40 to 65, you can retire. Why? Generativity versus stagnation is from 40 to 65 years old. Stage 8, at 65, you can have integrity and avoid despair. Why? Integrity versus despair is 65 years or older. But again, remember that it's not about the age, it's about the specifics within the stage that is going to help you get the answer. Because not every time that the age pops up does it just organically just fall into the template of the stage. So being mindful of what are the specifics of the stage, how can I compare it to the other stages, and what am I particularly looking at? This session went over different ways to be able to recognize and apply the concepts of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory and different milestones that you can particularly see, different aspects of Piaget's, also different theories, assimilation and accommodation. SS, the client stays the same. CC, the client changes. We went over Kohlberg's theory of moral development, different ways to be able to recognize and apply the 3 levels as well as the 6 stages. And then we tied it all together with Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. So different ways to be able to recognize and apply those. But again, do not try to memorize anything, but be able to recognize and apply them as it relates to the exam, because a lot of times people try to absorb it like a sponge or try to program themselves like a computer, and they beat themselves up. They just get themselves riled and dialed up, but that's never the goal. The goal is to be able to recognize and apply it. So when you're reading a question, being able to recognize the term, asking yourself, is this relevant? Is this irrelevant? And how can I compare each of these things to one another? So that way you're not as defeated, but you're able to recognize and apply it to go into the exam, kick it directly in the chest to get the job done. Question 1. A social worker and a family agency is working with a couple and their 5-year-old son. The couple reports that their son has been more distant from them and has been engaging in activities he previously had no interest in. The boy often only comes to the parents to show them a project that he has completed. The parents report that they feel like bad parents since their son no longer wants to spend time with them. Which psychosocial stage of development best explains the boy's behavior? A, initiative versus guilt. B, identity versus role confusion. C, intimacy versus isolation. D, industry versus inferiority. And when you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the poll. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the poll. The majority think it is A. Second place is C and D. Third place is B. Let's look at it. We're a social worker and a family agency. That's who we are and where we are at, working with a couple and their 5-year-old son. So that is our client system. The couple reports, so 2/3 of our client system, that their son has been more distant from them and has been engaging in activities that he previously had no interest in. The boy often only comes to the parents to show them a project that he has completed. The parents report, so again, 2/3 of our client system, that they feel like bad parents since their son no longer wants to spend time with them. So that is their perspective. We really haven't heard from the boy. Which psychosocial stage of development best explains the boy's behavior? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let that one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage, compare it back to the question, and see what we're looking at in particular. A, initiative versus guilt, is 3 to 6 years old. So we'll break it down based on the age, and then we'll allow for the specifics of the stage and compare it back to the question. B, identity versus role confusion, is 12 to 18 years old. C, intimacy versus isolation, 18 to 40 years old. D, industry versus inferiority, is 6 to 12 years old. Why? Because it starts at 6 and ends when they take a break at 12. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, family agency, that's who we are, where we're at, working with a couple, 5-year-old son, that is our client system. The couple report, so it's 2/3 of our client system. Their son has been more distant from them and has been engaged in activities that he previously had no interest in. The boy often only comes to the parents to show them a project that he has completed. The parents report 2/3 of the client system that they feel like bad parents since their son no longer wants to spend time with them. So keep all that in mind. We'll go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Nowhere in the question is it stating that the boy is seeking out intimate relationships outside of the family or isolating based on the fact that they don't feel like they are good enough to be in a relationship. In addition to that, we're going to rule out B. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that this child is looking to create an identity or identifying where they would like to see themselves in their life, or that they are confused based on the roles that they can occupy within their life. So now we're in between A, initiative versus guilt, where the boy would be initiating tasks on their own or feeling guilty for asserting themselves in some way, shape, or form. Or D, industry versus inferiority. Industry punching the clock on the assembly line and identifying collaborating with other individuals, or inferiority, feeling like they are not good enough to be with and for the situation. Well, let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular. We're at a family agency. We're working with a couple and the 5-year-old son. The couple reports their son has been more distant with them and has been engaged in activities that he previously had no interest in. So starting to step outside of things that would be normal within the person's situation. The boy only comes to the parents to show them a project that he's completed. So the boy only comes to show them their project that they completed. So they're looking for some feedback from the parents, and the parents report that they feel like they're bad parents since their son no longer wants to spend time with them. So now we have to think about it. Is the boy doing it on his own, or is he collaborating with other individuals? So for that reason, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because industry versus inferiority is based on the child working with other individuals. And even though they would fall within the age range of initiative versus guilt, the specifics of the stage of them taking an initiative outside of their parents and doing things on their own and getting feedback from the parents to reinforce their confidence and their ability to navigate life on their own. B is incorrect because the child's not trying to create a sense of identity or identifying where he'd like to be in life. Role confusion is not correct because they are not confused on what they're able to do. C is incorrect because they're not looking for an intimate partner outside of the family, or they're not isolating themselves. If anything, they're navigating away from the parents, but not keeping themselves away from everybody. And D is incorrect because they're doing it on their own and not collaborating with other individuals. So the correct answer here is A, initiative versus guilt. Why? Because the boy is taking an initiative, trying new activities when they previously had no interest in it, and they're coming back to the parents kind of as a safety net to ensure that what they're doing is getting their needs met. So the correct answer here is A, initiative versus guilt. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 2. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is meeting with a 22-year-old female for a recent larceny charge. The woman reports that she was just trying to get money for rent so she and her boyfriend would not get evicted. The woman reports that she feels guilty for what she has done and has been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety since her boyfriend will no longer talk to her. The woman feels that the social worker can help her gain skills to get her boyfriend back. Which psychosocial stage of development is the woman most likely in? A, identity versus role confusion. B, autonomy versus shame. C, initiative versus guilt. D, intimacy versus isolation. And when you have your answer, type the word hope in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting on the poll. The majority think it is D. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic. That's who we are and where we are at. Meeting with a 22-year-old female. That is our client for a recent larceny charge. So she was stealing. One reports that she was just trying to get money for rent so she and her boyfriend would not get evicted. So that was the purpose for why she stole in the first place. She did not want to get evicted. One reports that she feels guilty for what she has done and has been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety since her boyfriend will no longer talk to her. That is her main focus at this moment. And the woman feels that the social worker can help her gain skills to get her boyfriend back. Which psychosocial stage of development is the woman most likely in? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage based on the age and then compare the specifics of the stage. Back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, identity versus role confusion is 12 to 18 years old. B, autonomy versus shame is 1 to 3 years old. C, initiative versus guilt is 3 to 6 years old. And then D, intimacy versus isolation is 18 to 40 years old. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, outpatient clinic. That's we are where we're at. 22-year-old female. That's our client for recent larceny charge. She was stealing. One reports that she's been trying to get money for rent so she and her boyfriend would not get evicted. She's like, you know what? We need to stay in this place. One reports that she feels guilty for what she's done, and she's been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety since her boyfriend will no longer talk to her. She was stealing to get money. He stole her heart and he won't talk to her. One feels that the social worker can help her gain skills to get her boyfriend back. She wants him back. Please come back. So keep all in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A, why, nowhere in the question does it state that she's identifying where she wants to go or who she wants to be, or that she's confused based on where she would like to be in her life? We're also going to rule out C. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that she's taking an initiative within her life and that she's like, you know what, I'm doing this and I need to get feedback from somebody else, or I feel guilty asserting myself and or my needs. So therefore, we're in between B, autonomy versus shame, or D, intimacy versus isolation. So let's look back at the question. We have an outpatient social worker, 22-year-old female. She was stealing. She was just trying to get money for the rent so she and her boyfriend would not get evicted. So she's focused on her and her boyfriend at this given moment. So it's focused on the relationship. She feels guilty for what she's done. She's been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety. Why? Her boyfriend will no longer talk to her. So she is so focused on the boyfriend that is in her own view. The woman feels that the social worker can help her gain skills to get her boyfriend back. So that is where it's all focusing on, is the boyfriend. So now we have to think about it. Is she being autonomous and roaming the environment and looking back for somebody else to take care of her? Or does she feel shame based on who she is and what she's particularly done? Or D, intimacy, she's looking for love, and love, or I need to get away from myself and roam and focus on somebody else's needs. So based on that, we're going to rule out B. Why? Because she did take the freedom to do what she particularly wanted, but it wasn't on her own motivations. It was because she wanted to satisfy an intimate partner that just was like, you know what, you steal the money and not get us evicted, I'm going to steal your heart and run away. A is incorrect because nowhere in the question does it state that she's trying to identify where she would like to be, or that she's confused based on who she is. B is incorrect because she's not roaming free and looking, am I doing this correct or incorrect? Or, man, I can't really do things on my own. You need to tell me what to do. C is incorrect because she's not taking an initiative and roaming away from a protective entity. And it's not guilt, even though it says in the question that she's been feeling guilty. The two meanings are totally different. She's feeling guilty because her boyfriend isn't really talking to her anymore. But if the boyfriend was talking to her, she would have zero problems in some way, shape, or form. So the correct answer here is D, intimacy versus isolation, because she is so focused on love, aka she did not want her and her boyfriend to get evicted. She feels guilty not for the sole fact that she did a bad action, but because her boyfriend's not talking to her. And she's like, you know what? You can help my boyfriend come back to me. So I need those skills where you can help me charm him back to where we were. So the correct answer here is D, intimacy versus isolation. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 3. A social worker in a private practice is meeting with a 25-year-old female to help improve her depressive symptoms. The woman reports that she has a history of injecting heroin and cutting herself to cope with her depressive symptoms. The woman reports that she does not feel like anyone cares about her. The woman would like to identify ways to improve her mood and to find my purpose in life. Which psychosocial stage of development best explains the woman's situation? A, trust versus mistrust. B, identity versus role confusion. C, intimacy versus isolation. Or D, generativity versus stagnation. And when you have your answer, type the word tricky in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the poll, the majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is D. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a private practice. That's who we are and where we are at, meeting with a 25-year-old female. That is our client to help improve her depressive symptoms. That's what brought her in. The woman reports that she has a history of injecting heroin and cutting herself to cope with her depressive symptoms. The woman reports that she does not feel like anyone cares about her. The woman would like to identify ways to improve her mood and define my purpose in life. Which psychosocial stages of development best explains the woman's situation? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage based on the age and then allow for the specifics of the stage to compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, trust versus mistrust is 0 to 1 years old. B, identity versus role confusion is 12 to 18 years old. C, intimacy versus isolation is 18 to 40 years old. D, generativity versus stagnation is 40 to 65 years old. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, private practice. That's who we are, where we're at, working with a 25-year-old female, 25-year-old female, 25-year-old female to help improve her depressive symptoms. That's what brought her in. One report says she had history of injecting heroin and cutting herself to cope with her depressive symptoms. One report says she does not feel like anyone cares about her. And the woman would like to identify ways to improve her mood and define my purpose in life. So keep all in mind. So go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Nowhere does it state that she's identified where she wants to go and that she's generating as much as she possibly can in order to pass it on to the next generation, or that she is stagnant and not meeting up to the expectations that she particularly would like to see, based on the fact that she states that I want to find my purpose in life. So therefore, in order for D to be correct, she would have to have an idea of where she would like to be, and that she's either generating enough or that she's not accomplishing what she would like to see within for her situation. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that she's striving towards an intimate partner or that she's isolating from an intimate partner because she does not feel good enough. She states that she has depressive symptoms. She has a history of injecting heroin and cutting herself to cope. She states that she does not feel like anybody cares about her, but not that she's actively seeking out intimate relationships outside of her family or that she's isolating because she doesn't feel like she's good enough. So even though the age range, 18 to 40 years old, would fit the 25 years of age, we have to remember that it's not the age that's going to tell us, it's going to be the specifics of the stage. Now we're in between A, trust versus mistrust. Trust, she's able to count on other individuals to help her satisfy her needs in some way, shape, or form. Mistrust, she's not able to count on other individuals and she doesn't feel like she can get her needs met in some way, shape, or form. B, identity versus role confusion. Identity, she's trying to identify where she would like to see herself with and for her situation, or role confusion. She's confused based on where she can go in her life, based on other individuals always telling her particularly where to go. Let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular. We're working with a 25-year-old female. She's experiencing depressive symptoms. She has a history of injecting heroin and cutting herself to cope with her depressive symptoms. She does not feel like she has anyone in her life that she can count on. But in addition to that, she wants to find ways to improve her mood and to find my purpose in life. So is she so focused on developing relationships and having trust versus mistrust? Or is she like, I want to identify who I am, but I'm also confused with where I'm at. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A, because she does state that she doesn't feel like she has anyone that cares about her in her life, but her main goals are to identify ways to improve her mood and find her purpose in life. So therefore, we're going with B, identity versus role confusion, because she's trying to identify where she would like to go, but she's confused based on her own expectations and the skills and abilities that she has. A is incorrect because even though it says she doesn't feel like anyone cares about her, it's not entirely her focus at this given moment. C is incorrect because nowhere in the question does it state that she's trying to get in an intimate relationship with other individuals, or that she's isolating herself based on not feeling good enough. And D is incorrect because she has no idea where she wants to go. So in order to have generativity versus stagnation, she must either be generating enough or feeling like she's stagnant and not accomplishing enough within for her situation. So the correct answer here is B, identity versus role confusion. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A 5-year-old child has been having behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. The child will often demand their parents do things for them, even when it is not entirely possible. Last week, the child had an episode of anger in the grocery store because their parents would not buy them a teddy bear. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the child's behavior? A. Sensory motor. B. Pre-operational. C. Concrete operational. D. Formal operational. And when you have your answer, type the word blessed in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting on the poll. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is C and D. Let's look at it. Our client is a 5-year-old child who has been having behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. So that's what brought the 5-year-old child into us. The child will often demand their parents to do things for them, even when it is not entirely possible. Last week, and you like the time, hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. The child had an episode of anger in the grocery store because their parents would not buy them a teddy bear. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the child's behavior? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. So let's break down each stage based on the age and allow for the specifics of the stage to tell us the answer from there. A, sensory motor, is 0 to 2 years old because they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to navigate their environment. B, pre-operational, emphasis on pre. They're prior to navigate and working with other individuals. That is going to be 2 to 7 years old. C, concrete operational. Again, think of a concrete block. They're constructing things and having a cause and effect relationship with their environment. That is going to be 7 to 11 years old. D, formal operational. They're able to come up with formal plans. This is 11 years old and beyond. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. We're working with a 5-year-old child. That is our client having behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. And that's what is going on right now. Child will often demand their parents do things for them, even when it's not possible, even when it's not possible, even when it's not possible, even when it's not entirely possible. Last week, like the time, hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. Child had an episode of anger in the grocery store because their parents would not buy them a teddy bear. So keep all their mind. So we'll go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to roll out D. Why? Because nowhere in the question does it state that this 5-year-old child is making a formal plan and identifying what they're looking at. Why? Because they're demanding their parents do things even when it is not entirely possible. Formal operational would be like, okay, I know why they're not able to buy me the teddy bear, and this is what I particularly have to do to get the teddy bear. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because this individual is not able to start consider the factors that are going to be influencing the decisions of their parents based in the situation. This 5-year-old child is like, everything is about me. I have that egocentric type thinking, and I'm starting to have that intuitive type thinking and saying everything is about me. And I have that egocentric of I'm the ego, I'm the center of attention. And I have that intuitive type thinking of all inside of my mind is what everyone else is experiencing. Now we're between A, sensory motor, 0 to 2 years old, or 2 to 7 years old on that pre-operational. Let's look back at the question. We have a 5-year-old child, so that is who we are within this situation. So we have 5-year-old child, behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. They will demand things out of their parents. That's A-okay, but it's even when it's not entirely possible, that is the red flag within the situation. Last week, they were in the grocery store. They had an episode of anger, and they're like, you know what? I'm not going to do this, because the parents are like, you know what? Not buying the teddy bear. They're freaking out. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because sensory motor is where the child is utilizing their senses and their motor activity to navigate their environment. Pre-operational is where they're prior to being operational with other individuals. It's all about them. They have the egocentric type thinking, intuitive type thinking of whatever's inside my mind is what is going to be happening outside. Season correct because we're not looking at that concrete operational. They're not trying to construct things or having cause and effect type relationships based on objects. And D, formal operational is incorrect because they're not coming up with a formal plan. We're looking at B, pre-operational, because they're prior to becoming operational with other individuals that have that egocentric, everything is about me, I'm the center of everyone's mind, intuitive type thinking of whatever I feel in my mind is what other people should feel as well. So the correct answer here is B, pre-operational. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. A social worker in an outpatient clinic has been working with a 15-year-old boy for 1 month. The boy engaged in services per requirement on probation for stealing video games from the game store. The boy has been working on impulse control with the social worker. In the most recent session, the boy asked the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl that he likes. He explains to the social worker that if he asks out the girl, then they would no longer be friends. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the boy's thought process? A, concrete operational. B, pre-operational. C, formal operational. D, sensory motor. And when you have your answer, type the word growth in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the poll. The majority think it is C. Second place is A. Third place is B. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic. That's who we are. and where we are working with a 15-year-old boy. That is our client for 1 month. And you like the time, hop on top of it because I'll paint the picture of what we're looking at. The boy engaged in services per requirement of probation for stealing video games from the game store. So that's what brought him in 1 month ago. Boy's been working on impulse control with the social worker, so that has been his treatment goal in the most recent session. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at. The boy asks the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl that he likes. He wants some advice. He explains to the social worker that if he asks out the girl, then they would no longer be friends. So he's trying to make a decision that would be intuitive to his situation. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the boy's thought process? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage based on the age, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, concrete operational is 7 to 11 years old. B, pre-operational, prior to them working and operating with other individuals, is 2 to 7 years old. C, formal operational, they're coming up with a formal plan. That is going to be 11 years old and beyond. D, sensory motor, utilizing their senses and motor activity to navigate the environment. That is 0 to 2 years old. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker outpatient clinic. That's who we are, where we're at. 15-year-old boy. That's our client. 1 month. You don't like the time. Hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. The boy engaged in services per requirement of probation, first stealing video games from the game store. Boy's been working on impulse control with the social worker in the most recent session. You don't like the time. Hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. So what's going on right now? The boy asks the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl that he likes. He explains to the social worker that if he asks out the girl, then they would no longer be friends. So keep all their mind to go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that he's utilizing his senses or motor activity to navigate the environment. He's kind of coming up with a cause and effect type relationship. Sensory motor is there. Let me utilize my senses, motor activity to navigate the situation. However, in this particular situation, he asks the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl that he likes. So it's not him being like, all right, I just need to go with the flow and do what I think is right, because he states that if he asks out the girl, then they would no longer be friends. He did come in for some impulse control, but also we are going to rule out B. Why? Because it's not prior to being operational with and for the situation. If anything, he's not just thinking about himself. He doesn't have the egocentric or intuitive type thinking of like, whatever I got inside my mind, everyone should be feeling that as well. If anything, he's considering the needs of another individual and stating, you know what? I want to ask out this girl, but I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to ruin our friendship. So now we're in between A, concrete operational, or C, formal operational. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. We're working with a 15-year-old boy. It's been 1 month. He engaged in services per requirement of probation for stealing video games. He's been working on impulse control. In the most recent session, he's like, you know what? I want to ask out this person, but I'm not really sure how this will work out. If I ask them out, then we will no longer be friends, based on the fact that he's saying that it's probably not going to work out. So A, concrete operational is where he's able to see a cause and effect type relationship as it relates to objects. C, formal operational, he's coming up with a formal, elaborate, hypothetical, deductive reasoning type conclusion that is going to allow for an analysis of abstract concepts. So based on this, he wants to ask out a girl. And if we think about it, is a girl an object? Absolutely not. So therefore, A is going to be incorrect because he wants to ask out a human. Humans aren't objects. So for that reason, we're going to be looking at C, formal operational. He's trying to identify a formal plan in order to come up with a better solution and or outcome. A is incorrect because that is where you're seeing a cause and effect type relationship as it relates to objects. B is incorrect because that's where it's all about the individual. There's magical thinking and there's symbolic functioning. It's that intuitive type, everything that I got in my mind, everybody should experience as well. And D, sensory motor, identifying the senses and motor activity to navigate the environment. We're looking at somebody that's coming up with a formal plan, wants to get a better result, utilizing that hypothetical deductive reasoning. I'm coming up with a hypothetical situation. I'm deducting the negatives out of the situation. So the correct answer here is C, formal operational. So that's what we'd look at that question in particular. Question 6. A social worker in a middle school is meeting with a 17-year-old boy who was recently caught trying to steal food from the cafeteria. The boy reports that his family does not have a lot of money and that he was stealing to help provide food for his family. The boy understands that stealing is wrong, but also feels like his family's health is more important than following the rules. Which stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? A. Authority and social order. B. Social contract and individual rights. C. Universal principles. D. Individualism and exchange. And when you have your answer, type the word holiday in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the poll. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is C and D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a middle school. That's who we are and where we are at, meeting with a 17-year-old boy. That is our client who was recently caught trying to steal food from the cafeteria. So that's what brought him in to see us. The boy reports that his family does not have a lot of money and that he was stealing to help provide food for his family. The boy understands that stealing is wrong, but also feels like his family's health is more important than following the rules. Which stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, authority and social order is when someone becomes aware of the societal rules and laws and avoids breaking them at all costs. And the purpose here is to maintain social order because, again, authority and social order, they're trying to avoid being punished by a person of authority in society. B, social contract and individual rights is when someone attempts to benefit a particular group of people, because remember, it's focused on the individual rights, but it could also be for their community, regardless of the rules and regulations set in place, because they're creating their own contract and advocating for the rights of individuals. C, universal principles is when someone sets to change the rules of society by implementing their own set of rules beyond what society has already established. And the purpose is to benefit. And the biggest difference between universal principles and social contract and individual rights is to benefit the entire universe, the entire universe, the entire universe. D, individualism in exchange is when someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing things, and they will do anything to get the greatest amount of reward for themselves. It's all about them. They're giving up a part of their individualism in exchange for something greater in reward. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review. Social worker in a middle school. That's who we are. We're at 17-year-old boy. That's our client who's recently trying to steal food from the cafeteria. He reports that his family does not have a lot of money, and he was stealing to help provide food for his family. He's trying to improve his family's life. Boy understands that stealing is wrong, but also feels like his family's health is more important than following the rules. He's prioritizing his family's health over the rules of society. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because in the question, he states that he knows stealing is wrong. He acknowledges that, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to throttle down, and I'm going to make sure that my family's health is taken care of. Because he's like, you know what? Stealing is wrong, but my family's health is more important. So his focus is on his family's health, not on the rules and laws within society. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because he's not trying to advocate for every single individual on the planet. He's trying to state that his family's health is more important and that he is doing it for his family. He's like, my family does not have a lot of money. So therefore, I'm doing it for my family, not the entire universe. So now we're in between B, social contract, and individual rights, where he's trying to write a contract for the rights of specific individuals or his community, or D, individualism in exchange. I'm going to do something for a good deed in exchange for something that I could get for myself. So let's look back at the question to make sure we're not making a mistake. We're social worker, middle school, 17-year-old boy trying to steal food from the cafeteria. He was caught. He's like, my family doesn't have a lot of money. I was trying to do it to provide for my family, provide for my family. And I know that stealing is wrong. It's bad moves, bad vibes, but also feel like my family's health is more important. I'm willing to sacrifice myself. So for that reason, we're going to rule out D, because even though he is sacrificing himself, we have to identify what is the rationale behind that. And he states that he knows his family doesn't have a lot of money, but he's doing it to help provide for his family. And he states that he knows it's wrong, but I would rather do it to know that my family's taken care of and sacrifice myself. So for that reason, we're going to go with B, social contract and individual rights. He's writing a contract for the specific individuals, aka his family. A is incorrect because he's acknowledging that stealing is wrong for authority and social order. He just wouldn't steal and let his family's health deteriorate. C is incorrect because he's not stealing from this one middle school to help benefit every single family in the world. And then D is incorrect because he's not doing it for himself. He's doing it for his family. Yes, he could benefit because he's a part of the family, but the purpose isn't because he's stealing for his family to get affirmation from the family. So the correct answer here is B, social contract and individual rights, because he's writing his own contract, aka stealing from the school to benefit the rights of specific individuals, aka his family. So the correct answer is B, social contract and individual rights. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 7. A social worker is meeting with a 24-year-old female who reports feeling excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. The woman reports that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors that she likes asked her to do so. The woman reports that she did not know how much extra work it would cause her to do, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she could get from helping out her supervisor. Which stage of moral development best explains the woman's behavior? A, individualism and exchange. B, authority and social order. C, social contract and individual rights. D, conformity and interpersonal accord. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week in the chat. Opening the poll. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the poll. The majority thinking is D. Second place is A. Third place is B. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker meeting with a 24-year-old female. So that is who we are and who our client is, who reports feeling excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. So that's what brought her in to see us. The woman reports that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors that she likes asked her to do so. The woman reports that she did not know how much extra work it would cause her to do, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she could get from helping out her supervisor. Which stage of moral development best explains the woman's behavior? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage, compare back to the question, see what we're looking at in particular. A, individualism in exchange is when someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing things and they will do anything to get again the greatest amount of reward for themselves, because it's all about them. They're giving up a part of their individual, but it's in exchange for a great sum of reward. B, authority and social order is when someone becomes aware of the societal rules and laws and avoids breaking them at all costs. And the kicker here and the significance here, to maintain social order. So they're focused on the needs of other individuals. C, social contract and individual rights is when someone attempts to benefit a particular group of people or their community, regardless of the rules and regulations set in place, because they're focused on benefiting a community or a segment of communities versus them focusing on the entire universe, but they're willing to sacrifice themselves. D, conformity and interpersonal accord is when someone will avoid doing a particular behavior for fear that they will be isolated or rejected from a particular group of people that they deem important. So it's all about them conforming to the rules and expectations of a group of people. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review: social worker meeting with 24-year-old female. That's our client. Reports feeling excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. One reports that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors that she likes asked her to do so. The woman reports that she did not know how much extra work it would cause her to do, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she could get from helping out her supervisors. Keep all their mind. Look at their each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out B. Why nowhere in the question does it state that anyone is breaking the rules and or laws of society. So authority and social order would be like, you know what? We're going to incarcerate you for not taking these job responsibilities. And it nowhere in the question does it state that she would lose her job if she didn't take those responsibilities as well. We're also going to rule out C. Why nowhere in the question does it state that she's signing a contract to advocate for the rights of individuals or trying to improve her community in any way, shape, or form. She may have signed a contract to get those additional job responsibilities, but she's now getting a check for herself, not her community. Now we're in between A, individualism and exchange, where an individual gives up a part of themselves in order to get something in exchange for what they sacrificed, or D, conformity and interpersonal accord, where she's conforming to what a group of people are telling her to do in order to get acceptance. So let's look back at the question to make sure we're not making a mistake. We're working with a 24-year-old female, excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. So it's all based on work. She stated that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors asked her to do so. So if we think about that, she may be conforming to that particular group of individuals. But now the question doesn't stop. And she states that she did not want to miss out on any additional benefits, but she did not know how much extra work it would cost her to do, which is probably causing the excessive amounts of anxiety, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she can get. So now we have to think about it. Did she do it to get acceptance from her supervisor, or did she get these additional job responsibilities because she wanted to get additional money on her check? So for that reason, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because she states that it's somebody that she likes, but if the question stopped, we're looking at conformity and interpersonal accord. She said, you know what? I didn't know how much extra work it would cost me to do, but I'm trying to get that extra money on my check because I'm trying to get cashed out. So I didn't know what it looked like, but man, I heard the money and I jumped like a cat that got squirted with water into action. So the correct answer here is A, individualism in exchange, because she's given up a part of her individualism, aka her mental health and time, but she's getting money in exchange for what she signed up for. B is incorrect because nowhere in the question does it state that she could have been fired or that she's going to be incarcerated or arrested. C is incorrect because she's not signing a contract to advocate for the individual rights of her community or trying to benefit anybody but herself in this given situation. D is incorrect because she didn't do it because she wants to fit in with a particular peer group or to get acceptance. She did it for A, more money so that she can get cashed out. So the correct answer here is A, individualism and exchange. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 8. Social worker in an outpatient clinic is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old female who's been experiencing increased depression for the past 2 months. The woman reports that her friends have been protesting police brutality, and every time they invite her, that she declines. She does not believe in the actions of the police, but fears that she will be arrested, so she does not protest. Which stage of moral development is the woman most likely in? A, individualism and exchange. B, authority and social order. C, obedience and punishment orientation. D, conformity and interpersonal accord. When you have your answer, type one thing that you're grateful for in your life right now. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the poll, the majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is D. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic. That's who we are and where we are at, completing an intake assessment. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting with a 35-year-old female. That is our client who's been experiencing increased depression the past 2 months. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at. It's been going on for 2 months. We're meeting with her for the first time. The woman reports that her friends have been protesting police brutality, and every time they invite her, that she declines. She's like, no, thank you. She does not believe in the actions of police, but fears that she will be arrested, so she does not protest. Which stage of moral development is the woman most likely in? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, individualism and exchange is when someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing things, and they will do anything to get the greatest amount of reward. So it's all about rewards for them. They're sacrificing a part of themselves to get a reward in some way, shape, or form. B, authority and social order is when someone becomes aware of the societal rules and laws and avoids breaking them at all costs. And the purpose for not breaking them, and they're like, rules are rules, is to maintain social order. It's all about order with everyone. C, obedience and punishment orientation is when someone avoids doing a particular behavior to avoid being punished. And again, who they are punished by is going to make or break the type of stage that we're looking at, because they're being punished by someone they admire, or no, it's not the overall society of them being incarcerated. D, conformity and interpersonal accord is when someone will avoid doing a particular behavior for fear that they will be rejected or isolated from a particular group. And the key emphasis here is it's not just anybody, a particular group of people they deem important. So that is where they're conforming to whatever they particularly need. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review, social worker outpatient clinic. That's what we are, where we're at, complete an intake assessment. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it always paints the picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting with a 35-year-old female, been experiencing increased depression past 2 months. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. One reports that her friends have been protesting police brutality, and every time they invite her, she's like, no, thank you. And the reason why is because she does not believe in the actions of the police, but fears that she will be arrested, so she does not protest. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C, why obedience and punishment orientation is when somebody avoids doing a particular behavior for fear that they are going to be punished by somebody they admire and or know. In this situation, the woman states that she does not believe in the actions of the police, but she fears like she's going to be arrested. So she's fearing that she's going to be punished by the overall society, aka the police. We're also going to rule out A, individualism and exchange, because nowhere in the question does it state that she's getting anything for not protesting. If anything, what she's gaining is not being arrested. Individualism and exchange would be like, you know what? I don't really feel like protesting, but I'm going to go and protest with my friends because my friends will give me a reward later on. Now we're in between B, authority and social order, where she is respecting people of authority in order to avoid being punished, aka arrested, or D, conformity and interpersonal accord. I'm going to conform with the group of people that I want to be accepted by, and I'm going to do what they tell me to do, regardless of what I believe. Let's look back at the question. We're in an outpatient clinic, intake assessment, 35-year-old female. She's been having increased depression. She reports that her friends have been protesting. And every time she declines. So that's where conformity and interpersonal accord is where she would go, regardless if she wanted to or not. B, authority and social order. She's going to avoid going to avoid being arrested. So that's why she states, I don't believe in the police, but I don't want to be arrested, so I ain't going. So for that reason, we're going to rule out D, because conformity and interpersonal accord, she'd be like, man, my friends are going to hate me, so I'm just going to get arrested just because it'll make them like me. The answer here is B, authority and social order, because she's respecting people of authority, aka the police, to avoid being arrested. A is incorrect because she's not giving up anything for herself in order to gain something. C is incorrect because the police aren't somebody that she knows and or admires, and it's not somebody in her personal life. And D is incorrect because she's going against conformity and interpersonal accord. And her friends are saying, hey, you should come with us. She's like, no, I'm out, duck face selfie. I'm flying away and I'm not getting arrested. So the correct answer here is B, authority and social order, because she's respecting the authority, aka the police, to avoid being arrested. So the correct answer here is B, authority and social order. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 9. A social worker working at a high school is meeting with a 16-year-old boy who is referred by his teacher for making fun of another classmate for messing up during a presentation. The boy reports that he feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of his classmate. The boy begins discussing how all of his friends are going to think he is a bully and how they will no longer want to be around him. The boy reports that he struggles with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. Which stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? A, obedience and punishment orientation. B, conformity and interpersonal accord. C, authority and social order. D, social contract and individual rights. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're going to do for yourself next week in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting on the poll, the majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is C and D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker working at a high school. So that's who we are, where we're at, meeting with a 6-year-old boy. So that is our client who's referred by his teacher. So he's not coming on his own free will for making fun of another classmate for messing up during a presentation. So that's what is being brought in. Boy reports that he feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of his classmate. The boy begins discussing how all of his friends are going to think he's a bully and how they will no longer want to be around him. So he's starting to think about the social consequences. Boy reports that he struggles with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. Which stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the questions. Let's break down each stage, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, obedience and punishment orientation is when someone avoids doing a particular behavior to avoid being punished. And the key emphasis here, when it's being punished by someone they admire or know. They're not being punished by society. It's by somebody that they admire and know. B, conformity and interpersonal accord is when someone avoids doing a particular behavior to avoid being isolated or rejected by a particular group of people that they deem important. It's all about conforming to what individuals that they want to be around are saying within the situation. C, authority and social order is when someone becomes aware of the societal rules and laws and avoids breaking them at all costs. And the key component of why they stop breaking them at all costs are like, I can't break these, and it's to maintain social order. They're thinking about other people, not just themselves. D, social contract and individual rights is when someone will attempt to benefit a particular group of people or their community. So it's them writing a contract for the rights of particular individuals. And the key component is regardless of the rules and regulations set in place. They're ready to start writing their own contract. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review, social worker working at a high school. That's who we are, where we're at. 16-year-old boy. That's our client, was referred by his teachers, not coming on his own free will, making fun of another classmate for messing up during a presentation. Board reports to feel super guilty, and embarrassed for making fun of his classmate. Boy begins discussing how all of his friends are going to think it is a bully, and how they will no longer want to be around him. Boy reports that he struggles with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. So keep all in mind to go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state there are any circumstances where he could be arrested in any way, shape, or form, or there'd be a fatal thing happening in life. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because it's the total opposite of what he's doing. He's not advocating on the rights for particular individuals. If anything, he's degrading people and being like, man, you suck. You messed up. It's over for you. So he's actually oppressing people in some way, shape, or form. So now we're in between A, obedience and punishment orientation, where he is avoiding particular behaviors to avoid being punished by someone they admire or know, or B, conformity to interpersonal accord, conforming to particular groups of people, or fearing that they could be isolated from a particular group of people if they're not doing the right behaviors. Let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular. We're in a high school, 16-year-old boy was referred by the teacher. He's making fun of somebody for messing up during a presentation. So that's the key component there. He's like, you know what? I'm messing up because I actually made fun of somebody, and he states, I'm feeling super guilty and embarrassed. But the biggest thing is that he's like, you know what? All of my friends are going to think I'm a bully. They're no longer going to want to be around me. I'm always finding myself doing impulsive things. I'm getting myself into trouble. So is this cat doing obedience and punishment orientation, where he sees a particular group of people and saying, you know what? I'm going to be punished based on this, or B, conformity and interpersonal accord. I want people to think I'm a good person. I'm falling outside of the norm. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because even though he's getting into trouble, he's more focused on what social consequences he's about to have, aka not having any friends, because he says all of his friends are going to avoid him and isolate him now. A's incorrect, because yes, he is getting into trouble, but he's not fearing that he's going to be punished by a particular person. C's incorrect, because he's not going to be incarcerated for making fun of somebody during a presentation. D's incorrect, because he's not writing a contract to advocate for the individual rights of a particular community or group of people. B is the correct answer, because he's afraid that his friends are no longer going to want to be around him because he's making fun of people and he's not doing the right things to conform to that group of people. So the correct answer here is B, conformity and interpersonal accord. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker in a private practice is completing an intake assessment with a 26-year-old female regarding concerns of anxiety. The woman reports that she finds it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and at times will have panic attacks, yet is unable to identify any triggers. The woman reports that she feels like she is letting everyone down in her life and that she compares herself with her friends and feels inferior. Which psychosocial stage of development best explains the woman's situation? A. Identity versus role confusion. B. Trust versus mistrust. C. Intimacy versus isolation. D. Generativity versus stagnation. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from the session tonight in the chat. Opening the poll. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the poll. The majority think it is A. Second place is C. Third place is D. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a private practice. That's who we are and where we are at, completing an intake assessment. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting with a 26-year-old female. So that is our client regarding concerns of anxiety. That's what brought her in for her first session. One reports that she finds it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and at times will have panic attacks, yet is unable to identify any triggers. The one reports that she feels like she is letting everyone down and that she compares herself with her friends and feels inferior. She's letting everyone down in her life and she's comparing herself. Which psychosocial stage of development best explains the woman's situation? First, next, best, most, and should all mean the same thing. So do not let one word dictate how you answer the question. Let's break down each stage with the age, compare the specifics of the stage back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, identity versus role confusion is 12 to 18 years old. B, trust versus mistrust is 0 to 1 years old. C, intimacy versus isolation is 18 to 40 years old. And D, generativity versus stagnation is 40 to 65 years old. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, private practice. That's who we are, where we're at, complete an intake assessment. You know, like the time, hop on top of it because it also paints the picture of what we're looking at. So, it's our first time meeting with a 26-year-old female. That's our client regarding concerns of anxiety. That's what brought her in. One report says she finds it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and at times will have panic attacks, yet is unable to identify any triggers. Sounds consistent with the concerns of anxiety. One reports that she feels like she's letting everyone in her life down, and that she compares herself with her friends, and she feels inferior. So keep all their mind. Let's go through each answer choice. Right off the bat, we're going to rule out B. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that she feels that she can't trust anybody or that she has mistrust for anybody in any way, shape, or form. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Nowhere in the question does it state that she's looking for love or she's isolating herself from relationships because she doesn't feel like she's good enough. She's stating, I am letting everyone down. I'm comparing myself to everybody. I'm inferior to everybody. And my anxiety is sky high, shooting like a rocket to the moon. A, identity versus role confusion, is where she's saying, you know what? I'm not really sure what I should be doing in life. I'm confused where I need to be going. Degenerativity versus stagnation. I know where I should be going. I want to be generating a ton of stuff to pass on to the next generation. Stagnation. I know where I should be going, but I'm not producing enough and I'm stagnant and I'm not as successful as other people. So based on that, let's look back at the question, see what we're looking in particular. We're in a private practice. It's our first time meeting. 26-year-old female. She's coming in for concerns of anxiety, and then she tells us that she finds it difficult to keep her thoughts straight. She's having panic attacks. That's consistent with her anxiety symptoms. So those are the things that she's saying. She doesn't really have any ways to identify any triggers related to the panic attacks. Then she tells us that she feels that she's letting everyone down in her life. She's like, you know what? I know that these people expect all this out of me, but I feel inferior to them because I'm not where they're at. And my story and my lessons and blessings are not as grateful as theirs. So now we have to ask ourselves, does she have an identity and knows where she wants to go, or is she searching for an identity? So based on this, she has anxiety symptoms. She feels like she's letting everyone down. She's comparing herself to people and she feels inferior. So based on that, is she confused of where she should be going, or is she have already identified or looking to identify where she would like to go, or she identified where she wants to go and she's not meeting the expectations that she has? So for that reason, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because she feels like she's letting everyone down. So she already has a picture of where she should be and what people think of her. In addition to that, she's looking at somebody else's race, trying to run at their pace, and she's not looking at the lessons and blessings within her situation. She feels inferior. So the correct answer here is D, generativity versus stagnation, more along the lines of stagnation. She feels stagnant because she's not producing as much as she thought that she would be producing at this given moment. She feels like she's letting everyone down and that she's inferior. A is incorrect because she's not looking to identify where she wants to go, or she's not confused of what she should be doing. B is incorrect because we're not looking at any trust in any way, shape, or form. And C is incorrect because she didn't cite any love in any way in the question. But in addition to that, she's not isolating herself away from relationships because she doesn't feel good enough. She states she feels inferior, but not in the context of a relationship. The correct answer here is D, generativity versus stagnation, because she states that she's letting everyone down. So she must have a view of where she thinks that she should be. She's comparing herself to other people and saying, man, your life is better than mine. I'm inferior to you. So the correct answer here is D, generativity versus stagnation. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular.